Chapter 281. A Journey into the Unknown 2. Time flew. Only one day remained before the system's deadline. We knew very little about the journey ahead. Not even how long it would last. We were risking everything. There's a real chance we'll be gone for a long time. That would undoubtedly put us at odds with the temple. Snow didn't seem too concerned. He said the temple hadn't given him much anyway, and what lay ahead mattered more. Ghost, on the other hand, said the temple was never a place that helped him grow to begin with. Reasonable, considering he had spent his entire life in the Shadow Court. That night, we packed everything we could. Supplies, gear, rations. Enough to last us a long time. Enough to survive. The three of us slipped away in secret, heading toward the Oculus mountain range, near House Starlight. There, we met the mage I had arranged in advance. He was a rank S mage from one of the major guilds. Bringing him here in secret had cost me a fortune, but it was the least I could do to make this trip to the Shadow Sect possible. The mage, wearing a loose robe and sporting a thick beard, stared at the three of us. We were practically celebrities at this point, especially the hero, Snow. So he understood the weight of what he was about to do. Are you really sure about this? He was about to teleport the Empire's golden hero straight into the Nightmare Lands. No matter how he tried to justify it, it didn't sit right with him. But I responded without hesitation, my tone firm. I didn't hire you to ask questions. The only reason I brought him here was to teleport us close to the Shadow Sect and make the journey easier. He was a money-hungry mutt who never said no if the price was high. The mage nodded. Fair enough. He raised his staff and began channeling his aura, expanding a glowing white circle beneath us. The coordinates you gave me weren't precise, but this should drop you somewhere near the place you're aiming for. Will that do? I nodded. Yes, do it. Without hesitation, he increased the spell's intensity. I turned to my teammates. Ghost disappeared instantly into my shadow, while Snow stood calmly at my side. We were all wearing the same armor we'd used during the Victoriad, bringing a rush of memories with it. We exchanged a look. A single nod between us was all it took. Let's do this. Swoosh. A piercing hum rang out as our bodies were hurled through the teleportation circle. The world around me blurred, and a familiar sensation of nausea washed over me, typical of spatial displacement. But then, as the world settled, what entered my vision struck a chord. Those towering trees, the overgrown vines creeping across every inch of soil. We're here, I whispered. The forest of fear. The very place where my journey had begun 2 years ago. So this is the Eastern Nightmare Lands, Snow muttered, clearly awestruck. It was his first time venturing this deep. Let's move, I said firmly, already taking the lead. Snow followed immediately behind, with Ghost covering our backs from within the shadows. We advanced cautiously, prepared for anything. And it didn't take long before we encountered our first threat. Nightmare creatures crawling out from every corner. But, boom! With a devastating sweep of Balerion and Vermithor right after. We cleared everything in our path. Fast, precise. We didn't even pause. Everything that stood in our way fell as we kept moving forward. Scythe beasts, shriekers, and other horrors of the nightmare, the monsters that once brought me to the brink of death. Reduced to nothing with a single swing of my sword. I had changed more than I'd realized. These nightmare creatures are weaker than I expected, Snow noted aloud. Stay sharp, I replied immediately. We don't know what might be lurking. Honestly, though, I agreed with him. Unlike the other Nightmare Lands, the eastern side had no Nightmare Lord ruling over it. My father had slain the amygdala long ago. That was the only being here that had surpassed SS rank. Had beings like the Cosmos, the Lady of Eight Legs, or even the Abyss Watchers been present, this would have been a far more brutal journey. But to my surprise, none of those threats materialized. It was so calm that I struggled to believe it was real. Standing before the massive stairway, the one I had once crawled up, bleeding and broken, I stared at that darkness again. Snow, still in awe, asked softly, Fry, is this it? I nodded. The Shadow Sect. 1 hour. That's all it took. Just 1 hour to reach the Shadow Sect and complete the mission. It felt almost anticlimactic. Sure, the mage had teleported us close, and I knew the way. Something about how easily we arrived didn't sit right. I knew it couldn't be that simple. We climbed the staircase quickly, crossing the blackened, forgotten lands that once marked the boundary of the Shadow Sect. I expected to see Smiley or Sad at the very least. But there wasn't a trace of either. What's going on here? I asked quietly, my tone sharp with unease as Snow trailed behind, surveying the place for himself. I opened the system to check for answers, but the emergency mission had vanished. In its place, a new section appeared. One I hadn't seen before. Oh? 3 empty entries, marked only by question marks. The mystery deepened, and so did my sense of helplessness. What now? Snow's voice came from behind after his quiet exploration of the sect he had only ever heard about in my stories. We keep going, I said. It was all I could say. We pressed forward until we reached the heart of the sect, where the old temple still stood, the one I'd once been sealed inside. I glanced at Balerion instinctively, remembering the moment I obtained him, my first real companion in this world. We stepped inside, expecting to find the altar where I had once shed blood. But it was gone. Something else stood in its place. All 3 of us froze. Snow stared, wide-eyed. Ghost emerged from the shadows, silent but just as stunned. This is... Snow's voice trailed off as I finally understood what the mission had meant all along. The journey was never about crossing the Empire to reach the Shadow Sect. This place was just the starting point. I let out a bitter laugh and walked toward the object that was now flooding the room with radiant light. A teleportation gate. A portal into the unknown. I had no idea where it would take us. But I knew one thing for certain. The real mission would begin the moment I stepped through that gate. And so, I stood there, staring into the ominous red light spilling from its center, silently praying I hadn't just led everyone straight into ruin. Chapter 282. Far from Home, 1. Fry Starlight's POV. A crimson gate pulsed with astonishing aura fluctuations, tickling our senses and releasing an overwhelming pressure that made sweat slide slowly down my forehead. I wiped it away with my elbow. We had been circling this gate for an hour now, hesitating. Should we go in? Snow asked, his face serious. I knew we couldn't linger here forever. The real mission would begin the moment we stepped through that gate. We didn't know where it would lead us, or if returning would even be an option. But I had no choice but to move forward. That much I understood more than anything else. We move, I said, resolute in ending this. We should stay close. We have no idea where we'll end up, Ghost suggested. We all agreed. It was the best way to proceed. Let's do it. Without warning, the 3 of us rushed forward and were swallowed by the Crimson Gate. In less than a second, we vanished from the Shadow Sect, as if we had never been there at all. Silence returned to that ancient place. A silence soon broken by the sound of heavy footsteps. Those of a massive statue dragging a long sword behind it, its face hidden behind a smiling mask. The statue raised its blade and slashed violently at the gate. With a single strike, the structure was completely destroyed. Its supports collapsed, the aura dissipated, and nothing was left. The journey had become one of no return. As for the statue, it turned and left its task complete. This time, the teleportation process took longer than usual. What had once happened in a blink now took several minutes. Minutes spent drifting through a stream of aura. Until we finally reached the end. The gate opened and spat us out onto soft ground. Our bodies slammed into it roughly. Lying there on the sand, the 3 of us immediately got back up, dizzy from the strange journey. But what we saw next was even stranger. Red sand. An endless land stretching out to a distant horizon. But our eyes quickly turned to the sky. A crimson sky, and a suffocating atmosphere, thick with a gloomy aura that made our skin crawl. Above us, 3 massive moons loomed. So large they looked ready to crash into the ground at any moment. We stared at the scene, mouths agape, trying to process what we were seeing. Is this an illusion? Ghost was the first to voice what we were all thinking. But it wasn't an illusion. This is real. We're far from home, I said, brushing my fingers through the soft red sand. Snow Lionheart closed his eyes, trying to absorb the surrounding aura, only to frown as soon as that sinister energy entered his body. This aura, I nodded. We're no longer on Earth. It was an obvious conclusion, but still hard to believe. The 3 of us wandered around the gate, slowly taking in the fact that we had left our planet behind. We were far, far from Earth, and far from the seal created by the first Emperor Casus Valerian. We had entered the unknown literally this time. But what's wrong with this cursed place? Everything feels dead, Snow said, nauseated just from touching the surrounding aura. There was air, yes, but the place felt utterly deserted, like a graveyard. Observing the scattered signs and the land's eerie features, I narrowed my eyes, realizing what we were seeing. What you're looking at is the final result of what could happen to our planet if we lose to the Ultras and let the demons return. Ghost and Snow listened intently. These were truths they were hearing for the first time. This place is just one of their countless victims. A planet that fell to that wicked race. And it likely happened a long time ago. Demons are creatures that live off life power, draining it endlessly. That's how they were created. Their home world, or what some call the demon realm, died a long time ago. That was when their kind began moving, searching for new places to inhabit. And so it began. They invade planets, strip them of all signs of life, and slaughter everything that breathes. They remain there until the planet dies, then move on to the next. And the cycle repeats, a never-ending loop that has continued for ages. Ages far too long to count. Perhaps even Earth, still underdeveloped, was one of their last victims. Judging by the signs around us, the race that once lived on this planet was wiped out a long time ago. The planet we had set foot on had been dead for ages. And the demons had already left it behind. In other words, this place was nothing more than a graveyard. I spoke indifferently, as if stating undeniable facts. But what I received in return were puzzled and curious expressions. I smiled at them. What? Did you think demons and humans were the only races to ever exist in this world? We were nothing but a single dot in a vast universe. Snow shook his head.
No.
But Fry, how do you know all of this? Until now, humanity had lived inside a black box, shielded from everything beyond, trapped in an illusion. Snow's question was valid. It even made me laugh bitterly. There's much I know, and even more I don't. But it's knowledge I never asked to have. It was more like a curse that had been placed upon me, one I was forced to live with. I decided to drop the subject and walk ahead. I didn't expect us to end up in a place like this. If you two want to turn back now, I wouldn't blame you. In fact, I'd rather you did. Facing the Eastern Nightmare Lands was one thing, but wandering a planet that had fallen to the demons was something else entirely. I was certain that whatever awaited here would be catastrophic beyond reason. That's why I preferred to continue alone. But Snow and Ghost were already at my sides. What are you saying now after we've come this far? Snow said, and Ghost agreed. We didn't come all this way just to tuck our tails and run at the first real challenge. Besides, retreat isn't an option anymore. Ghost raised his thumb, gesturing to the gate behind us. That thing stopped working the moment we set foot on this planet. He said it casually, but the weight behind his words was written all over our faces, mine and Snow's both. Wait, what? Are you serious? I rushed back to the gate to find that he was right. It wasn't working anymore. He's right. Disaster. An utter disaster. Was this his way of telling me that escape was off the table? We were stranded, on a planet whose position we didn't even know in this vast universe. An unfamiliar tension began crawling through me as my mind flooded with possible scenarios. Chapter 283, Far From Home, 2. There has to be another way. Unlike me and Snow, Ghost remained strangely calm, as if the current situation were nothing but a child's game. That unsettled me even more. Gates don't operate on a single path, so either it's malfunctioning, or someone tampered with it from the other side. Who? We wandered through the sect for hours and didn't see anyone, Snow replied, confident in his claim. After all, he had scanned the entire place before we arrived. But his words weren't absolute. He couldn't sense something vastly more powerful than himself. Besides, everything about the sect was cloaked in mystery. I forced myself to stay calm and open the system interface. Just as Ghost said, there had to be a solution, and if none existed, I'd create one through the power of the system. Everything would be fine as long as we completed the mission. I opened the system, intending to learn what our next move should be, where we were supposed to go in this barren red desert. But my hand froze before I could tap the interface, and the same thing happened to Snow and Ghost. It was like hundreds of filthy worms had begun crawling across my skin, an overwhelming wave of dread and discomfort. All three of us turned toward the same spot at the same time, the place where that threatening presence was coming from. The desert was wide and flat, allowing us to see everything around us clearly. And yet we hadn't seen it until it was already near. A sharp, metallic sound rang out. Black hair drifting in the air. Something walking on all fours. A horse? Snow asked.
No.
The dreadful feeling inside me intensified. As that creature with a single eye approached, it resembled a deformed man, twisted by dozens of mutations until it had taken on a grotesque form that walked on all fours. Like a feral horse made of rotting flesh. The aura surrounding it radiated a dreadful aura that pierced straight through our souls. The three of us took a step back. Unconsciously, that thing had already laid its eye on us. Ah, so you were at my side all along. The creature's mouth twisted into a grin. It talks. We didn't even have time to be surprised. The moment it spotted us, the thing lunged forward with a shrieking metallic cry. Blood, blood. Give me some blood. Get ready to fight, I shouted, drawing both Balerion and the Dark Sister at once. Snow and Ghost were focused too, so much so they didn't even notice the Dark Sister. All their attention was locked on that horrific creature. It leapt through a cloud of aura, crashing down on us violently and kicking up a storm of red sand. Its horse-like body began to deform grotesquely, sprouting hands made of rotten flesh, hands that flew toward us. 10,000 steps of shadow, black cutter, one sword style, absolute zero. I unleashed dozens of black arcs, slicing through the grotesque hands, while Snow froze the rest with a massive surge of icy aura. We managed to repel the initial wave, barely, which made me let my guard down for just a moment. A moment where that creature's reflection flashed in my hawk eyes. Fry! Snow's shout was the last thing I heard before the beast rammed into me, hurling me away. I felt bones crack under the force of impact. The monster charged after me on all fours, trying to trample me while screaming incoherent words. Blood! Blood! Just a little blood, please! Its hooves slammed the ground relentlessly as I dodged beneath them in a frenzy. When I looked up, I saw what was beneath its lower torso. There was a swirling mass of sticky red fluid dripping toward me. The first drop hit the ground. The sand began to vaporize instantly. Acid? Please, the blood. Just a little blood. Why won't you give me any? I want blood, blood, blood. The monstrous voice mixed with shrill screeches as it tried to crush me, pouring down a stream of that strange, acidic fluid directly at me. A single touch, and I'd melt into a rotten pile of flesh. But the ground beneath me turned black just in time, and Ghost pulled me away into his shadow. On the other side, the raging beast took a devastating hit. Snow had descended upon it with a storm of strikes using Vermithor. Starlight aura burned rapidly around him as he slashed wildly at the creature. Too bright! The monster howled, shielding itself from Snow, who now looked like a literal radiant blue star. Ghost and I reappeared away from the attack. As soon as we landed, I dashed back into the fray. Wait for the right moment, I shouted at Ghost, igniting both my blades with dark aura as I charged toward the monster in Snow, who were still locked in fierce battle. 10,000 steps of shadow, black meteor, focused on defending against Snow. The beast groaned in pain as a black beam struck it from the side. With Snow on its right and me on its left, we exchanged a glance, understanding each other instantly. Pouring every ounce of power we had, we launched a flurry of savage slashes. Black arcs from my left, and radiant white arcs from Snow's right. The creature howled, bleeding profusely under the onslaught of our twin assault. Tried to escape, but dozens of black threads coiled tightly around it, courtesy of Ghost's shadow manipulation. It was completely trapped. The beast didn't scream. It wept. Its sobbing was audible as tears streamed from its lone eye. Why? Why won't you give it to me? It was utterly insane. We were literally carving it apart without stopping, yet we had barely pierced through its putrid flesh. Gasp. All I wanted was just a little blood, fresh, clean blood. That's all this rotting body needs. The monster cried while we continued our relentless assault, until its sobbing stopped, and its hair rose sharply toward the sky. Then it opened its mouth and screamed, a piercing, explosive cry that felt like someone had stabbed my ears from the inside. Blood poured from them instantly. The scream was accompanied by a wave of violet aura that sent both Snow and me flying, hurling us far away from the beast. I immediately regained my balance, attempting to charge at it again, only to be blindsided by a beam of concentrated aura shooting toward me, fired straight from the monster's gaping mouth. There was no time to dodge. I crossed my swords, trying to withstand it, and moments later the impact struck. I fought to stay standing as the aura beam scorched my body at an alarming rate. Graha! The creature didn't stop. That metallic screech echoed once again. Suddenly, the ground beneath me exploded. Dozens of giant mouths made of decaying flesh burst upward, all trying to devour me. Preoccupied with fending off the overwhelming assault, I failed to notice that the beast had already found a new target. Snow. He fought back, but the raging creature clung to him tightly as more mouths formed across its grotesque body. They bit into him relentlessly, causing blood to spill profusely. Snow cried out in agony, while the monster, ecstatic, let out another wild scream. Ah! Blood! Blood! Delicious! So delicious! Finally! It drank Snow's blood at a horrifying pace. Snow struggled, but his expression turned grim the moment he realized the aura inside his body had stopped moving. Something had paralyzed it. He couldn't fight back, and I was still too busy dealing with the mouths to help. I realized I wouldn't make it in time. Chapter 284. Far from Home, 3. Snow Lionheart felt his life being drained away. It was all reflected in Ghost's eyes. The silent killer assessed the situation quickly, grasping the severity of our predicament. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, knowing that none of his usual techniques would be enough to separate that thing from Snow. His thoughts accelerated. Sometimes, even the smallest things can cast the largest shadows. Words he had heard long ago. Ghost acted instantly, throwing his daggers away and clasping his fingers into the shape of a weapon. His eyes locked onto the beast that threatened to consume Snow. What he was about to do went against every teaching of the Shadow Court. But that didn't matter anymore. He drew his hand through the air in a sequence of slashes. For in total, 2 vertical, 2 horizontal, forming a square. The space around him trembled. The ground itself shivered as his dark eyes began to glow. Space cleave, with just a few words, and a series of erratic gestures. Space froze. Time, reality, and matter twisted as filthy blood rained through the air. Everything within the zone Ghost had targeted distorted violently. The beast's body was torn apart within the crude square Ghost had drawn. As a result, the mouths clinging to Snow were sliced away cleanly. along with two of the monster's limbs. What Snow and I failed to accomplish together, Ghost did with a single strike. With a weary smile, Ghost collapsed to the ground, blood trailing from his nose. I had no idea what Ghost just did, or what that power even was, but he had done something incredible. Snow, now freed and seething with fury, gripped his sword tightly Vermithor, already healing his wounds at a terrifying pace. His eyes glowed as he raised his blade, all 12 aura types swirling around him, merging into one devastating force. Then he roared, releasing his strongest technique.
Grand Cosmic Formation.
Snow's personal version of ignition. A devastating wave of light engulfed the monster, which had barely recovered from Ghost's attack before Snow followed up with a cataclysmic blow. The explosion of light was so intense, it illuminated the crimson sky for an instant, leaving behind a massive crater in the red sands. Snow was the first to appear, breathing heavily and using his sword for support. At his feet lay the creature's mangled corpse, disfigured beyond recognition. Its head had rolled to the side, cleanly severed from its body. Snow stared at the fallen monster, his expression mixed with triumph and unease. We had won, but he had hit it with everything he had. Grand cosmic formation erased everything in its path. And yet, even after all that, the creature's body was still mostly intact. Fortunately, Snow had targeted its neck. That was the only reason its head came off. Otherwise, the battle might have continued. Supporting Ghost, I joined Snow within the crater, standing over the monstrous thing that now lay at our feet. It was finally over. Ah, or so we thought. The three of us leapt backward in unison as the creature's eye suddenly opened, and a moan escaped its mouth. Seriously? Your head is cut off, damn it. How is it still alive? Terror gripped us at the thought of that thing rising again. But thankfully, it didn't show any signs of movement, even after some time had passed. Slowly, we approached it. And the moment we did, it glanced at us with its single eye. Humans? For the first time, the creature spoke a word we recognized. We looked at one another, stunned. None of us knew how to respond, or whether we should even respond to a creature that had just tried to kill us moments ago. But I decided to step forward. You know about humans? I asked, not expecting much, but it answered. Of course I do. Humans. Humans are good. His voice was deep and weary. His confusing words left us wondering. How did it know about humans? The monster tried to look around but couldn't move, slowly realizing its condition. What happened? Why am I like this? It asked in confusion, fear lacing its tone. Where am I? Do you know good humans? Where did everyone go? And who did this to me? His questions only deepened our confusion. Was he pretending? Had he forgotten what happened just moments ago? What was I even supposed to say to that? I don't know. That was all I could manage. I see. After all that madness, the creature suddenly seemed oddly understanding. I exchanged glances with the others. Now that it had come to this, I decided to go beyond small talk. Sitting down next to the severed head, I asked, what happened to this place? And where exactly are we? The monster stared at me silently for a moment before answering in a calm voice. This place is called Launder. Launder. Yes, we lived peaceful lives, but everything changed when he came. That monster. Who are you talking about? The Lord of Graves. He mentioned a name that left both Ghost and Snow puzzled. But unlike them, I recognized it. One of the upper seats. The creature began weeping as soon as it spoke of that person. We held out well. We fought hard. We fought with honor until the very end. But everything collapsed when he joined the battle. The sorrowful monster broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as it recalled those memories. He didn't just kill us. He turned us into these forms. How can a being like that be allowed to live? It's not fair. It's not fair at all. What did we do to deserve this fate? Everyone's dead. All of them, They're all gone.
He.
He 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 he. Hehehehehehehehe.
Hey! I shouted at him, but he had gone completely mad, laughing hysterically with that grating metallic screech. He's completely lost it. I backed away from the severed head, realizing that all I'd gained from this exchange was a splitting headache. What was all that talk about? This Lord of Graves? Snow asked as I let out a tired sigh. If that thing is here, don't even think about facing him. Don't approach him at all. Ghost and Snow caught the serious tone in my voice, and I meant every word. Leaving that lifeless monster behind, I climbed out of the crater of destruction. Thankfully, the war on this planet had ended long ago, which meant the chances of us encountering that monster were extremely low, but not zero, and that meant I had to act, to avoid him at all costs. With that in mind, I opened the system, hoping to find a path forward. But as the name of a single enemy appeared, one name already weighing me down after just one battle, I realized that this was only the beginning. Chapter 285, Light and Shadow 1. Fry Starlight's POV. Our journey had just begun. Into a place called Launder. And to be honest, I had no idea what this place was. Trapped with no way back, we barely survived the first trial, and that was just the beginning. I stepped away from Snow and Ghost, who remained near the corpse of the beast we had just slain, and opened the system interface. I needed to know why the system had brought us here. We couldn't afford to wander aimlessly and hope to stumble across what it wanted from us. This place, it was an entire planet. So once again, the system was my only guide. The familiar blue screen appeared. I was expecting a quest, a hint, anything. But instead, the 3 locked slots had been revealed. Puzzle pieces. Memory? Sword? Shield? I read the words again and again. Puzzle pieces? Was this some kind of riddle I needed to solve? No matter how I looked at it, it felt like the system wanted me to find these things. The sword and shield sounded like material items. Maybe weapons. But memory? I had no idea what that one meant. Still, I had a hunch that one of these pieces would be here in Launder. The sword, that word stuck with me. I already had Dark Sister and Balerion. They were supposed to be among the strongest weapons out there. So was the system really asking me to find another sword? Or was sword meant to be metaphorical? I sat down on the red sand and sighed, giving up for now. Overthinking it was only making things worse. The real issue was, how was I supposed to find any of these pieces? There wasn't even a hint from the system this time, which meant I only had one tool left. The one that had saved me countless times before. System advice. My own personal compass. Resting my chin on my palm, I debated how to approach this. Usually, I just used the direct advice. But I was too afraid of what kind of obstacle it might throw at me this time. In the worst-case scenario, I might end up facing Lord of Graves, who I recently discovered could be on this planet. There was absolutely no way, even if the heavens flipped and the earth shattered, that I could survive an encounter with one of the top 10 demon lords, especially since each of them possessed one of Agarotha's destructive abilities. And among them, Lord of Graves was easily one of the worst, a monster that brought death wherever he walked. I had to avoid him at all costs, which meant grinding my brain over the vague nonsense of the random advice instead. Using the achievement points I'd earned from my last mission, I bought one random advice. Where should I go if I want to complete the system's mission? I asked the system and the screen lit up, revealing the answer to me. Ding. Oh, a random advice. It's been a while. But what can I say? The dumb user finally decided to use his head. Listen closely and try to understand the words you're about to read. They might just save your life. The answer to your question is, the Starborn, Heart of Darkness, the villainous hero, the unlucky lucky one, and the crazy idiot. Get it? Of course you don't. But hey, maybe those words will save you from doom. Who knows? I'd like to say I was surprised by the advice, but I'd long since gotten used to the system's nonsense. Still, I couldn't begin to understand how that mess of a description was supposed to point me in any direction. Scratching my head, I sighed in defeat. That was 250 achievement points. Wasted. And as always, the price changed however the system pleased. Total scam. With no clue what that string of vague words was supposed to mean, I had no choice but to use the direct route. Honestly, I hesitated. I really didn't want to trigger a challenge that would summon the Grave's Lord himself, but I was running out of options. Despite everything, I hadn't given up on deciphering the riddle behind the system's random advice. I keep searching for answers. But we couldn't afford to stay idle forever. For now, I'd move forward, relying on the direct instruction, hoping I'd find the real answer before the obstacle showed up. Direct advice. Head north. Straightforward. Easy to understand. I nearly cursed at the absurd contrast between this and the cryptic nonsense from earlier. But I had no other option. North. I got up and made my way back to Snow and Ghost. They had tried to reason with the deranged creature we just fought, but it had only spiraled deeper into madness the moment he uttered the name Grave Lord. In that state, headless and broken, he left us no choice but to put him down. A merciful end. Let's move, guys. We couldn't stay here any longer. Which way? Ghost asked. I raised my sword and pointed to the horizon. This way. All three of us stared toward the vast expanse of barren crimson sand stretching into the distance. We didn't waste time. We set off immediately, keeping a fast, steady pace. There was silence for a while until Snow finally spoke. Never thought I'd be running across the surface of another planet. Neither did I replied shortly. But it looks like we're not the first. Snow made a good point. Something that creature had said earlier stuck with us. He knew humans, and not only that, he spoke our language. Could there really be humans here? If so, the real question was how. It was a headache just thinking about it, but not entirely impossible. Many powerful warriors had vanished without a trace in the past, especially during the old era when SSS-ranked humans still existed. Whether they're here or not, we'll find out eventually. I had a strong feeling that the existence of humans on this world was directly connected to what I was searching for. In fact, I was willing to bet on it. There were too many unknowns, and overthinking it wouldn't help. So I shifted the topic. That creature put us in a tough spot. Snow nodded. Yeah, he was insanely strong. Strong enough that Snow had to use his own version of ignition. The grand cosmic formation formed through Vermithor. I didn't know you had another weapon, Fry. In response, I lifted the black katana still in my hand. It belonged to my father, Abraham Starlight. That explains the power boost. Impressive. The Dark Sister definitely enhanced my strength. But the real surprise wasn't me or my sword. It was someone else I'd been thinking about for a while now. I think the real shock here is our quiet friend back there. Sharing a look, Snow and I both turned to the assassin walking behind us. Agreed. Chapter 286. Light and Shadow 2. Once all eyes were on him, Ghost knew what was coming. After all, he had pulled off something neither Vermithor, Dark Sister, nor Balerion could do. He had thrown his daggers, then unleashed a strike that cleanly sliced through that creature. How did you manage to cut him like that? Snow asked. Ghost stayed silent for a moment, then finally spoke. We all had our secrets. Some we'd started sharing lately, and others we still kept hidden. This time, Ghost chose to reveal a bit of his own. I didn't cut him. What? Snow and I asked in unison, confused. Ghost matched our stride as he explained something we'd never heard from him before. All I did was isolate the portion of space he was in. The parts of his body inside the sealed zone remained intact, but the ones outside were simply severed. He said it without emotion, but what he had done was far from ordinary. It was complex. But in simple terms, he had manipulated space itself. By isolating the exact area he targeted from the rest of the surrounding space, anything outside the boundary was instantly sliced, erased. A strike that cut through the very fabric of reality, destroying anything beyond the limit Ghost set. That ability was absolutely insane. Since when did you have something like that? Snow asked in disbelief. If Ghost had used something like that back in the Victoriad, who knows how things might have turned out. The outcome of the entire arc could have changed. Snow's question seemed to stir something in the silent assassin's memory. I came from the Court of Shadows, he said. Naturally, we were familiar with that organization of assassins. Though only the bare minimum. Ghost continued. The court exists and doesn't at the same time. You can't reach it through conventional means. Snow and I listened closely. After all, nothing on the map ever mentioned a place called the Court of Shadows. So, as paradoxical as his words sounded, they somehow made sense. The Court of Shadows is a brutal training ground that produces the fiercest assassins, as I'm sure you both already know. But those assassins aren't equal. They're ranked and classified under a system. The court system. The court was unlike anything else. There are 10 courts in total. The first 5 are manageable, but from the 6th to the 9th, they're pure hell. Was it something like a trial system? A series of missions or death matches? That's what I imagined. I never fleshed out the Court of Shadows properly in the past. It was just a concept I introduced on the fly. But then something caught my attention. Why only up to the 9th? I asked. Aren't there 10 courts? Ghost answered calmly. The 10th was always thought to be a myth. No one in history ever reached it. The trial at the end of the 9th is simply impossible. His voice held weight, a memory soaked in blood. The 10 courts have always existed, shrouded in mystery. Some even believe they weren't created by humans. Over the years, top assassins have tried to reach the final stage. Not a single one succeeded. But then, Ghost paused for a moment. A few years ago, that changed. I reached the 10th court. At those words, Snow and I looked at him with newfound respect. I didn't fully understand what that meant, but Ghost had just claimed he achieved something no one else ever had. Ghost Umbra was far more important than he let on. And Imhi had learned that the hard way not so long ago. He broke the rules of the court during the Victoriad. An offense punishable by death. But he lived while others died. Because his life was too valuable to lose. I can't tell you what I found in the 10th court, he said. But that ability I used earlier, it's something I learned there. And it's not a power I can afford to use in front of too many eyes. He made it clear that he wouldn't say another word. But he'd said enough. You're incredible, man, I said without thinking. Snow nodded with a smile. I'm glad to have someone like you watching my back, Ghost Umbra. Knowing our comrade was far stronger than we thought. It was reassuring. It boosted our chances of survival significantly. Because who knew what horrors still lay ahead? Fry and his team continued their journey into the unknown. Among the 3, Ghost's eyes quietly followed Frey's back. His mind drifted to the words he hadn't spoken. The rest of the story. What he found in the 10th court. What shaped the Ghost Umbra of today. It wasn't a grand treasure, nor a legendary place. It was a room. Just a single dark room with a wooden chair in the center. A chair upon which a man sat. Ghost had only been 13 when he miraculously passed the 9th court. And what awaited him in the 10th was a man. A man in a long coat and wide-brimmed hat. What stood out were his arms. Arms that were as long as he was tall, over 2 meters in length. A strange being. Eerie, almost unsettling. But he smiled when he saw Ghost and welcomed him. And those arms were impossible to ignore. That's why Ghost referred to him as the man with the long arms. A being unlike anything he had ever seen before. After surviving the hellish trials of the court, Ghost found himself face to face with an ending he could have never imagined. The man with the long arms was calm, welcoming even as if he had been waiting for Ghost all along. That mysterious figure became his mentor, his guide. You have no idea, Fry, Ghost thought quietly as he looked at his friend. The shadow that follows the light. Ghost's obsession with finding someone to fight beside someone to serve from the shadows. It didn't come from nowhere. It wasn't something passed down by Mist or anyone else. No, that ideal was planted in him by the man with the long arms. He told Ghost many things, things that shaped his beliefs, things that made him search for a light whose shadow he could fight from. And the one Ghost ultimately chose was Fry. He tried to hide it as much as he could, but deep down Ghost always knew that one day this moment would come, because the man with the long arms had already told him what fate awaited him, what he was destined to do, why the Court of Shadows even existed in the first place. Ghost had been confused at first, but as he watched Frey's journey, watched him defy logic, change fate, and rise through fire and blood, he grew certain. It was him, Fry Starlight. Everyone plays their role in this world. And Ghost, he had simply played his part from the very beginning. Chapter 287. Unveiling the Path 1. Fry Starlight's POV. Boom! Under the night sky lit by those glowing moons above us, the sound of deafening explosions was the perfect anthem for that night. After entering what looked like a forest hidden within the endless desert, we found ourselves under attack by nightmare creatures erupting from underground. Giant worms with spinning maws of hundreds of razor-sharp teeth, like living buzzsaws. Exhausted from the battles we'd fought day after day, Snow and I leapt at the cursed creatures, which kept diving back into the earth after every strike. There was only one way to deal with them. Ignition! Great cosmic formation! Unleashing our strongest attacks at once, Snow and I launched nuclear-grade assaults, tearing the entire ground apart and reducing those damned worms into scattered pieces beneath the soil. Once we were done, we both collapsed to the ground, panting heavily. Hair disheveled, blood dripping from every part of our bodies, armor shattered completely. We were in a miserable state. 1 full month. It had been a whole month since we entered this land. The desert I thought we'd clear quickly turned into a month-long trial, and we hadn't even reached its end yet. We were already pushing beyond the limit I'd set for this mission. It made me question, how massive is this planet called Launder? What made it worse was that we'd found nothing. All we encountered were relentless attacks from nightmare creatures, the likes of which I'd never seen before. "Are you both all right?" Ghost asked. He was in slightly better shape since he fought from the shadows, but even he had taken a beating from this land. I waved weakly. "I'm fine." With emotion, I activated the dimensional ring I brought with me and pulled out another set of light armor. This was my 5th change already. "We can't keep going like this," Snow said, stating the obvious. "There's no other choice," I replied simply, the weight of dead ends heavy on my shoulders. "You said head north, and that's what we've been doing for an entire month. But all we've found are stronger nightmare creatures than the ones on our planet." Snow stepped closer, those golden eyes burning with the same determination I'd come to expect from him. "We've survived so far, but we're reaching our limits, Fry. How much longer can we keep going? A day? A month? And what if the next enemy is the one who ends it all?" It had taken the full effort of all 3 of us to survive so far, and barely at that. I knew this already, but still. "Then what do you suggest we do?" I snapped, a bitter taste filling my mouth. "Our only lead is to keep heading north. Like it or not. That's the only option we have." I couldn't turn back now. I had no other choice but to press on, even if we found nothing. I couldn't allow despair to win just because I'd failed for a month. I had to keep moving north, no matter how long it took. Trapped in a spiral of negative thoughts, Snow could clearly see the storm inside me. In a swift motion, he grabbed my head and lifted it to meet his gaze. "Get a grip, Fry. I'm not saying we should stop, but in our current state, the path ahead might not be the right one either." I understood what he meant, but it didn't matter. My only clue was the system's advice. "As I said before, this is the only." "No, it's not." He cut me off before I could finish. "There's still that riddle you told us about earlier." He pointed to the random system advice I had shared with them as a backup, though it had gotten us nowhere so far. But Snow had another take. Son of the star, heart of darkness, the villainous hero, the cursed lucky fool and the mad idiot. No matter how I look at it, these are just traits, descriptions of a person, not directions. Resting a hand under his chin, Snow began pacing around the area, deep in thought. Got something? Ghost asked, having already given up on the riddle and seated himself on the ground. I have a theory, but for now I'd like to change our course. Snow suggested. Where to, then? I asked this time. Although we hadn't found anything yet, that could easily change tomorrow, or maybe even the day after. I couldn't bring myself to stray from our current path just to try something else. But Snow had a different opinion. For now, we'll head south. But I was about to object, but Snow saw it coming. Fry, we've spent an entire month heading north. There's no harm in trying something different. If it fails, we can always go back. That path isn't going anywhere. With his typical heroic composure and convincing logic, I found myself losing the argument entirely. I want you to trust me. After hearing that, I had no choice but to agree. Couldn't say no. Especially considering he had followed me this far based solely on faith. Letting out a heavy sigh, I nodded. All right, let's do it. Snow smiled in return as Ghost rose from his spot. South this time, huh? So it seems. We took a few minutes to recover before setting off again. This time, toward the south. We moved swiftly through the sandy plains, doing our best to avoid the nightmare creatures. We'd encountered many types so far. Flying beasts from above, feral ones from the front, and even those monstrous worms that attacked from beneath the ground. The one thing they all had in common was that even the weakest of them surpassed rank S. A ridiculous power scale even by Nightmare Land standards. So this is what it looks like after hours of running and evading nightmare beasts. Creatures we'd grown more adept at dealing with. Ghost was the first to break the silence. What do you mean? He scanned the lifeless, barren terrain around us. The land that lost to the demons. In other words, this is what humanity's world would look like if we lost. In fact, maybe that's already happening. Nightmare lands like this, they might be just the beginning. Time flew by, and I grew more and more convinced that heading south was a mistake. The system doesn't make mistakes. I was sure of it. That thought consumed me. Until something suddenly shifted inside me. A flutter, like butterflies in my stomach. As if my insides were being stirred by something far away. I clutched my chest and came to a halt. Snow and Ghost stopped as well. What's wrong? They both asked. But I was too focused on the strange sensation to respond. I couldn't explain it. Felt as if something was pulling me. Like, I've been here before. A sudden sense of familiarity, of belonging. It was powerful. Overwhelming, even. Before I knew it, I had started running. My eyes glowing faintly with violet light. Seeing this from behind, Snow nodded with a faint smile. Looks like you've found your path. He said it calmly, but I hated to admit he was right. The answer to that riddle was you. Yeah. Honestly, I'm still not sure if this feeling is real or not. But it's strong. So strong I can't ignore it. In the end, I was the answer. The moment I neared my goal, I could feel it. I was the map. Realizing that, I finally understood what the system's direct advice had done to me. The obstacle was the advice itself. By heading north, I was moving away from my destination, making it impossible for me to sense it. My blind faith in the system would have led me straight to death this time. But now that I had a thread to follow, we pushed forward. Twice as fast. The feeling inside me kept growing stronger and stronger. It made me wonder. What was I about to find? What was wrong with my body? I was certain I'd never set foot in this place before. Yet somehow, the feeling inside told me otherwise. As if I'd been here not too long ago. All of it only deepened the confusion clouding my mind. Chapter 288. Unveiling the Path. 2. The journey dragged on for several more hours. But this time, for the first time, We stepped onto solid ground. We're finally out of that damned desert. We exhaled in relief as we entered a completely new region. A forest. But not just any forest. Trees with pitch-black bark. Leaves darker than night. A suffocating atmosphere thick with tainted aura. If anything, this place felt even worse than the desert we just left behind. For now, we decided to stop briefly. Just enough to recover some strength and get a bit of sleep. We did it in shifts. 2 hours of rest per person. That was the most we could afford before moving out again. How's it looking, Fry? We're getting closer. I didn't know why. But the feeling kept growing stronger. Deep inside that black forest, we finally saw signs of civilization. But it was buried, long gone. We barely made out what looked like old homes, ancient ruins, but no bodies, only destruction. Among the wreckage, we found remnants of strange carvings, old writings none of us could understand. "This is strange," Ghost said, scanning the surroundings. "There's no trace of any corpses." As he made his observation, Snow spoke up. "I guess it makes sense if this place has been abandoned for a long time." But Ghost shook his head. "Bodies don't vanish this easily. There's always something left behind." Spoken like a true assassin. Whoever once lived here, they didn't just die. They were erased. That was the message Ghost was trying to get across. Whatever happened here was a mystery, but I had no time to dwell on it. "Let's move," I said to the others, and we surged forward again. Speeding through the trees, the three of us stopped at the exact same moment. Forced to, in fact. The earth trembled beneath our feet. A furious roar shook the skies above. It was a thunderous sound that made us instantly reach for our weapons. Whatever was coming, it came from above. "One of those cursed birds again?" Snow muttered. We'd fought nightmare beasts shaped like giant eagles with canine heads before. Naturally, we assumed it was one of them. But those expectations were crushed on the spot. Eyes wide open, the three of us stared up at the majestic figure descending from the heavens. With wings that cast massive shadows and skin covered in glimmering white scales, the creature came crashing down. Ghost and Snow were just as stunned as I was when they shouted at the same time. A dragon? A creature they'd only heard of in old, forgotten legends. And yet, there it was, flesh and blood right before our eyes. But that wasn't the real problem. What truly paralyzed us was the pressure it radiated. Our awe had distracted us from noticing the severe wounds covering its body. He wasn't flying toward us. He was falling, injured. His massive frame crashed into the ground like a meteor, shaking the entire forest. The impact carved a path of devastation straight to where we stood. Groaning in pain, the dragon struggled to rise. His crimson, glowing eyes locking onto us the moment he steadied himself. The second he saw our figures. His pupils narrowed in rage. And then he roared. "Filthy humans!" His roar shook the earth beneath us, forcing all three of us to instinctively leap back. "He speaks!" Snow shouted in disbelief. He wasn't just speaking. He recognized us as humans. And more than that, he was furious. His jaws parted wide, revealing the swirling crimson blaze within. A devastating beam of fire erupted forth, and we barely evaded it by diving into Ghost's shadow. The inferno carved a burning path across the landscape, reducing everything in its wake to ash. "Why do you humans insist on tampering with powers you cannot control?" The dragon bellowed in rage, his flames setting the blackened forest ablaze. The corrupted aura surrounding him grew heavier, thick with fury. Then, with a powerful surge of his aura, he tore us out from hiding. Staring him down, my mind raced, but found no answers. This wasn't just a dragon. He was a being of the pantheon. A species that stood at the apex of all others. There was no obvious way to harm him. His scaled body was like armor forged by the gods themselves. And yet, he could burn us to cinders with a single breath. As he opened his jaws again, ready to finish us off, I summoned all the strength I could. But I stopped. My hawk eyes caught something, A flicker in the eastern sky. A spatial ripple almost imperceptible. A projectile?
No.
An arrow. A black, high-velocity arrow sliced through the air and struck the dragon's neck with terrifying precision. A pained roar escaped him as a surge of blood followed. The blow had been devastating, lethal. I stood frozen, stunned, as a creature of the pantheon fell before my eyes. Felled in a single strike. His enormous frame began to shrink, his divine form reverting to something more human-like. White hair, a body carved with strange glowing runes. But blood. There was so much blood. He was dead. Snow and Ghost stared at him in silence, their eyes wide. But mine immediately turned to the sky, to the horizon, tracing the arrow's path backward. Using my hawk eyes to their absolute limit, I searched until I found her. Distant, blurred, but unmistakable. A lone figure, a woman, dark skin, a massive bow that dwarfed her height, a skull mask veiling her face. She stared directly at us for a moment, then vanished, without a trace. There was no doubt in my mind. I narrowed my eyes, turning back to the crater the dragon had left behind. She was human, but not just any human. My memory was far from perfect, but I could never forget her face. I had seen her before, in my father's memories. That woman, she was one of the 4 he encountered on that fateful day, on the Shadow Sect. And now, it seemed, they were much closer than I ever imagined. Chapter 289. The Lord of Graves 1. The dragon's body collapsed, its colossal form crashing down before gradually morphing into something disturbingly humanoid. Standing around the lifeless creature, Fry and his companions could barely resist the urge to collapse themselves. They had touched the edge of the world. They were just ordinary humans, born and raised on a planet they once believed to be the entirety of existence. The Gate Cataclysm, centuries ago, had opened new horizons, but only slightly. For people like them, the world had always meant the land beneath their feet. But that land was nothing more than a black speck on a canvas far grander than they had ever imagined. After stepping foot on a new world and encountering beings beyond their understanding, they now stood before something that had existed only in myths. "I'm not hallucinating, am I?" Snow said, his voice unsteady. That was a dragon, right? He was still trying to grasp the impossible, especially the part where the dragon had taken on a human-like form. "In truth, their kind is called the Pantheon," Fry replied, his voice steady. "But yes, that was a dragon." He stepped forward to examine the black arrow that had felled the creature. The moment his fingers neared it, Fry felt an intense surge of aura still radiating from the shaft. The arrow pulsed with raw power, unfazed even after delivering a killing blow. Just from that pressure alone, Fry could tell, the one who fired it had long surpassed SS+ rank. Possibly far beyond that, which only raised more questions. Who were they? That strange group, the ones aligned with the blue-eyed engineer. Fry wanted to find them, at least talk to them. He had a hunch they were nearby, but locating them at his current level was a fantasy. For now, all he could do was wait, and hope they'd be the ones to make the next move. Pushing those thoughts aside, Fry returned his focus to his 2 traveling companions. Snow and Ghost were still processing the surreal sight, occasionally murmuring the new word that had left Frey's mouth. Pantheon. They continued forward, making their way through the scorched forest. The flames hadn't stopped burning. Fry kept his gaze lowered, unable to meet their eyes. He had no valid excuse for how he knew so much. No story that would explain it all. When they'd asked before, all he could offer was, "I'll explain when the time comes." But what could he possibly say? That he was a reincarnated author with knowledge of the future. It sounded laughable even to him. Unable to tell the truth. Lost on a foreign planet with no way back. Hunted by the most powerful being in existence. Chaos. Total, utter chaos. And Fry was barely holding himself together. Walking a path carved out by someone else. In moments like this, He longed for the days when his only goal was returning to his family. And his world. Back then, things had been cruel, but at least they were clear. Now, he was stuck in a maze he never chose, and that strange sensation inside him, an invisible pull, was growing stronger with each step, as if countless hands were pushing him forward, urging him to move faster. "We're close," he finally muttered. It was all he could say. Leaving the inferno behind, the trio continued their journey, venturing deeper into the heart of the forest. And then, they stopped. They didn't mean to. Their bodies just froze. How many times had this happened during their journey? Fry had lost count. But again, they stood paralyzed by the sight before them. Ahead lay solid black earth. Above it, a blood-red mist churned, heavy with ominous aura that clawed at their skin. And within the mist, hundreds of glowing eyes, twisted abominations drifted aimlessly. Hair floated unnaturally upward, and their forms were grotesque mirrors of the nightmare creature they'd once barely defeated. "Fry, don't tell me that is the way forward," Snow said, voice tight. Fry nodded slowly, unease etched across his face. "It is." The force guiding him pointed directly into the swarm. "What now?" Snow asked. "We barely took down one, and now we're facing an entire horde." It was suicide. Even someone like Mikar Valerian would fall against odds like these. "Fighting isn't an option," Ghost said. His tone made it clear this wasn't up for debate. And neither of them argued. Normally, Ghost would have followed his instincts. Those instincts screaming at him to turn around and leave this cursed place behind. But that wasn't an option. Not when they'd already chosen to follow Fry to the very end. With a heavy sigh, Ghost expanded his shadow and motioned for both Fry and Snow to step closer. "Our only option is to try and sneak through." "Is that even possible?" Fry asked. Stealth was a logical choice, sure. But how, when they were up against hundreds of nightmare beasts that walked on four legs like monstrous warhorses? Ghost didn't sugarcoat it. "To be honest, our chances are slim. But that's the only shot we have." Relying on his stealth abilities, Ghost was betting they could slip between the beasts and push through while the creatures moved ahead just enough to leave an opening. It wasn't a perfect plan. Far from it, but it was all they had. Moving behind the towering creatures, the trio followed Ghost's lead as he spread his dark aura like a cloak over their bodies. His shadow field masked their presence completely, one of the many assassination techniques he had perfected over the years. But this wasn't like the others. This time he was hiding three people, not one. And their enemies weren't human. Step by step, every meter they covered felt like miles. They pressed forward, drenched in sweat. The only sound echoing in their ears was the pounding of hooves against the hardened ground. Endless, thunderous. The crimson fog thickened with every step, swallowing everything in a haze of blood and shadow. They couldn't even see the beasts clearly anymore. Only silhouettes, only hoofbeats. Ready to sprint for their lives the moment they were discovered, they pushed forward, inch by painful inch. Time passed, slowly, agonizingly, but it passed. And they weren't found. A rare stroke of luck, one they didn't dare take for granted. Fry allowed himself a flicker of hope. That hope vanished the moment his eyes locked. Briefly, unmistakably, with one of the monstrous horse-like creatures. He froze, just for a second. But a second was more than enough. The beast had seen him. Of that, Fry was sure. Panic surged through his limbs. He nearly shoved Ghost and Snow to run. But the creature didn't attack. Instead, it turned its massive head and walked away, completely uninterested in their presence. Fry blinked, stunned. Had it really seen him? Ghost and Snow had felt it too. "They're ignoring us?" "It's hard to believe," Snow murmured. Carefully, Ghost withdrew his shadow aura. Step by step, they approached the towering beasts again. Closer than before. They waited for something, anything, to happen. But the monsters didn't react. Didn't even flinch. It's like we don't exist to them. Confused but unwilling to waste the opportunity, they continued forward. slipping unnoticed through a crowd of nightmares. They walked for what felt like hours. The beasts didn't stop. The red fog grew thicker, heavier, as if bleeding from the sky itself. There were thousands of them, each stronger than an S-rank creature, all wandering aimlessly through the haze. Fry found himself wondering the same question that was etched across Snow and Ghost's faces. What would happen if an army like this descended upon Earth one day? And worse, this army had lost utterly to just a fraction of the demon's true power. Fry had come here searching for answers. So far, all he'd found was despair. It was as if he'd been forced into a game where losing was the only outcome. At some point, the ground beneath their feet changed. No longer solid, it turned soft, sticky. Their boots squelched against something they couldn't see, something that resisted beneath every step. Chapter 290. The Lord of Graves, 2. The fog had thickened so much it completely blinded them. They could barely breathe through the weight of the corrupted aura pressing down from every direction. Every step stirred the stench of rot and decay, an unbearable odor that clung to their lungs and minds like poison. Fry tried not to ask the question, but he couldn't stop himself. What exactly are we walking on? Driven by a surge of curiosity, Fry slowly leaned forward, trying to get a better look at the blood-slick ground beneath them. With the help of his hawk eyes, everything came into sharp focus, and his face darkened with every passing second. That wasn't just some slimy terrain. The solid black earth was still there underneath. What they were walking on was flesh and blood. The tension spiked violently when he realized it. They were treading over corpses. Thousands, no, far more than that. Twisted, mutilated bodies had been laid across the ground like some grotesque carpet. They were skinned, featureless, just raw muscle and hints of mouths and eyes that had once belonged to living beings. The red fog, the wandering beasts, the absolute silence. Fry couldn't help but wonder, because it certainly felt like it. Luckily, the three of them were used to blood. If not, they might have broken long ago. But even they were starting to reach their limit. What the hell happened here? Snow muttered, his voice shaky as he took in the most horrifying sight of his life. A massacre! That was the only word that fit. A grotesque genocide, where creatures that once lived in peace were torn apart, mutilated beyond recognition. Words could no longer express what they saw. The only thing they could do now was get out. They pushed forward, and then, things got worse. Fry suddenly froze. Something was clinging to his leg. Panicked, he looked down and saw a pair of hands gripping his ankle. The corpse beneath him let out a soft, broken moan. He tried to kick it off instinctively. But everything spiraled into madness the moment all the corpses beneath them began to twitch. Weapons drawn, hearts racing, they braced for the assault. But the attack never came. Instead, the corpses began to crawl, trying to flee. Mercy! The word came from every direction. Mercy! Please, have mercy. They were begging. Have mercy upon us. These things, these skinned, broken bodies were pleading for their lives. Fry immediately dropped to one knee, grabbing the one that had held on to him, desperate for answers amid the chaos. What happened here? The corpse trembled, voice raw and low. Oh, you, help me. He is the hideous, have mercy upon us. The great evil, the nightmare, the beast of beasts, he did this to us. Whoever this was, whatever he had endured, Fry could feel the agony radiating from his voice alone. Mercy, mercy! The cries grew louder, louder than ever. The dead were awake, scrambling in terror, dragging what was left of their bodies away like insects. A moment ago there had been silence. Now it was madness. He'd mentioned a great evil. Who? Fry shouted. Who did this? What could have possibly caused such a massacre? The answer came with a name that turned his blood cold. The Lord of Graves. Him again. Fry cursed under his breath as the screams around them intensified. The corpse in his arms began sobbing, wet, choking cries that turned to blood. We waited for so long, for his return. but he never came back. The corpse grieved aloud. So many of us chose to fight rather than wait. But all that awaited us was something worse than death. Fry could barely hear him anymore. Between the screams, the reeking air, and Ghost and Snow yelling at him to move, everything blurred. "Who did you wait for?" he shouted with all he had. "Our king," the corpse replied. "But he never came. We should have never left the Crownlands. It was the only haven, the only place safe from the Lord of Graves." And then, as if summoned by his name, a pressure swept through the land. A monstrous aura, unlike anything Fry or even Snow had ever felt before. A suffocating force that stole the air from their lungs. "Too late," the corpse whispered. "He's already here." Those words hit like a falling star. The pressure rose, overwhelming, inescapable. Something was coming. Something terrifying. "Fry!" Snow and Ghost shouted in unison, panic lacing their voices as they prepared to flee. But the presence, they couldn't outrun it. "Fry!" they called again. "Shut up!" Fry roared back, face twisted with rage and something deeper, something primal. With both hands, he drew his blades. Blood surged. Aura exploded. He entered his full ascension, activating every ounce of power he had left. Channeling the ocean of aura within him, Fry stood firm as the earth beneath them began to tremble. He was close. Time was running out. Without hesitation, Fry shouted at Snow and Ghost, ordering them to use the latter's ability and retreat into his shadow. Given the terror of the moment, neither of them argued. As they vanished into the darkness, Fry clenched his teeth, bracing himself for what was coming. His worst fear had come true. The enemy he never wanted to face was approaching fast. There was only one option left: run. Lowering his stance like a sprinter at the starting line, Fry focused all the aura in his body into his legs. With a roar, this time he didn't ignite his blades but his legs. The ground shattered beneath him as a massive explosion of violet aura launched Fry's starlight like a missile through the air. The spot where he'd stood moments ago turned into a crater of pure devastation. The moaning corpses were obliterated in an instant. As for Fry, he was nowhere near the impact site anymore. With his legs nearly destroyed, blood dripping like water from pulverized muscle, Fry rocketed through the landscape, tearing through stone, terrain, even mountain ridges, until he finally crashed down, far, far away. Collapsed on the ground. His breathing labored. Fray's feet were nothing more than a mangled, bloody mess. But his face didn't relax for even a second because that monstrous aura, it was still coming. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't stopped hunting them. Snow and Ghost emerged from the shadow immediately. The sight of Fry horrified them, but they didn't have the luxury to react. Snow grabbed both of them, summoning every ounce of power he had left. Void Step, activating his strongest ability. Snow vanished, then reappeared, then vanished again in rapid succession, teleporting them as far away as he could, again and again. Void Step. How many kilometers had they crossed? He didn't know. He only knew one thing. He couldn't stop. The pressure behind them made his heart feel like it would burst. A sensation he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Fear. A fear deeper than anything he had ever known. A monster among monsters. Void Step. Over and over, Snow pushed further, farther, faster, refusing to look back. Because if he did, he might have seen the land itself turn black behind them, as death spread and consumed all life in its path. Void St. Snow halted mid-step. Fry and Ghost froze with him. Beads of sweat rolled down their skin. Their bodies wouldn't move. The suffocating aura was gone. But the dread, it had never been greater. Because beneath their feet, a massive shadow began to swell and stretch. The shadow of something standing right behind them. Thump, thump, thump. Their heartbeats became the only sound in their ears. With excruciating hesitation, they slowly turned their heads, and heard it, a sharp, piercing hiss. What stood behind them defied reason itself. shrouded in a cloak of corrupted aura, with a face like a skeletal mask carved from bone. Its hollow eye sockets glowed with crimson light. He had come, the last being they wanted to meet. The air itself froze as the creature slowly extended his hand toward them. None of them could move. Even Fry, barely holding himself together, felt his mind slip at the sight. Rank 6 of the demon's upper seats. The Lord of Graves, Asmodeus. Chapter 291. From Nightmare to Nightmare. Time refused to move forward. Fry and his companions could barely breathe as they found themselves standing before him. The overwhelming pressure that crushed their bodies made it impossible to think, let alone act. All they could do in that moment was freeze, awaiting his next move, like lambs patiently waiting for the blade. Snow had lost all awareness, not even realizing he had knocked Fry over. Fry, who could no longer stand after his legs had been blown apart, now lying on the ground, Fry stared up at the demon before him. But this wasn't just a demon. It was death itself standing at their doorstep. Asmodeus didn't speak, not even a single word. Whether he was capable of speech at all was uncertain. All that escaped the skeletal maw was a constant hiss, a sound that deepened their terror with every passing second. Fry had once stood before the Demon King himself, Agaroth, but that had only been a distant echo of the real thing. Projection, diluted and incomplete. The pressure Asmodeus unleashed now, however, made that memory seem insignificant. This wasn't a projection. This was the real thing. We're going to die. That thought struck them all at once. They were going to die, unable to lift a finger in defense. Only now did they realize how foolish they had been to ever believe they could face something like this. The Lord of Graves extended his hand. Everything moved in slow motion. Fry and the others could do nothing but gasp for air as they awaited the end. Swoosh. Their fear blinded them to the fact that the demon's hand had stopped. Still outstretched toward them, it had been halted. Not by will but by force. In the same instant, a ripple spread outward, releasing a powerful aura that revealed a thin membrane, an invisible barrier separating Fry and the others from the abomination before them. The air grew heavier as Asmodeus pushed harder against that barrier. Fry, collapsed on the ground, stared in awe as he gradually began to regain his senses. Slowly regaining control over his body, stared in disbelief. The terror the Lord of Graves had buried in their hearts had dulled their senses. So much so that they hadn't even noticed how far they'd been pushed back during their desperate retreat. Gradually, Fry and the others began to take in their surroundings. Only now did they notice the transparent veil that split the world in two. On one side, the fertile, green ground they stood upon, and beyond the barrier, a lifeless black wasteland. Then it happened. A surge of dark aura erupted skyward as the Lord of Graves launched a devastating strike, trying to shatter the barrier. Boom! His blows rocked the earth, making it tremble as if weeping over its own doom. Asmodeus wasn't a creature to fight. He was a calamity. Each of his attacks far surpassed anything the trio had ever witnessed. And he didn't stop at one. He unleashed hundreds, each one strong enough to erase them from existence. But the true miracle wasn't the demon's fury. It was the barrier that fragile, translucent veil held. Unbelievable! That thought echoed in their minds. Even knowing the barrier stood between them and the monster, they couldn't move. They sat there, helpless, as the Lord of Graves rained down his wrath, the earth quaking beneath them. Amid the chaos, as he lay on the ground, Fry glanced at his companions. They were spellbound, completely overtaken by the monstrous display. Fry closed his eyes. Look closely, he thought, even as the searing pain from his shattered legs failed to bring him back from the terror. Look closely at the true power of a being that stands at the very top of this world. It was time to wake up. The humans who believed they had won the war centuries ago. It was time to face reality. Before a being that had surpassed even the SSS rank. This was the moment to understand. This one entity alone could wipe out humanity. Before the embodiment of death, That delicate barrier was their only shield, and they could only pray it wouldn't break. Asmodeus's assault continued for only a few minutes, but the destruction he left behind was immense. The good news? He failed. The monster couldn't breach the barrier that stood proudly before him. Fry and the others were left in awe. What kind of spell was this? More importantly, what kind of being had cast such a barrier, one capable of withstanding an assault from the 6th upper-rank demon? By now, Fry and the others had fully regained themselves, scrambling to put as much distance as they could between them and the nightmare that had shown them a new definition of fear. Their desperate retreat hadn't gone unnoticed. The Lord of Graves had seen everything through his hollow eyes. His skull-like face showed no emotion, but the aura around him told a different story. He opened his mouth, and from the depths of hell itself, a sound emerged. A scream, a wail, a distorted, soul-chilling shriek. Fry and the others couldn't even begin to describe that horrid sound. But it never failed to make every hair on their bodies stand on end. "What is he doing?" Snow asked, but none of them had an answer. Why was that thing screaming? As they waited for some kind of explanation, the ground beneath them began to shake again, this time violently. But Asmodeus wasn't the cause. Something else was. Fry was the first to realize what was happening, his hawk eyes catching the truth. "That's not a scream." His eyes widened. "That's a call." From the distance, they saw them. Hundreds, no, thousands of nightmarish creatures emerging. Those creatures that had once ignored them completely, allowing them to pass unharmed, were now charging at them like mad beasts. Grotesque monsters, vaguely shaped like horses, sprinted toward them in a frenzy. Nightmare beasts, completely mindless. And the one who had driven them insane was none other than the Lord of Graves himself. Is he trying to use that army to attack us? There were thousands of them, and they were quickly closing in on the barrier. But what does he hope to accomplish with this? Even that damn demon's attacks couldn't break through the barrier. How would these creatures do it? If a being of SSS rank couldn't shatter the barrier, then what hope did low-tier nightmare beasts have? It wasn't a flawed observation, but Snow's words made Fry realize something far more important. Demon? Frey's expression darkened, because he finally understood something crucial. That seemingly invincible barrier had already been breached, and not by some overwhelmingly powerful entity or monster. The ones who had entered were them, Fry and his companions. They had passed through without even noticing it. In other words, with a sharp cry, Fry shouted, "Run, as fast as you can." Now, that barrier wasn't absolute. It was designed to block specific targets. And those targets could be summed up in a single word, demon. Meaning, anything else can pass through. And just like that, Frey's warning proved true. Chapter 292. A Blade in the Blood. The nightmare beasts surged past Asmodeus and continued straight through the barrier, as if it wasn't even there. The Lord of Graves vanished among the monstrous tide. And Fry and his companions understood the scale of the disaster the moment they saw that army pouring in toward them. They were in the thousands. They had survived the ultimate nightmare, only to find another waiting for them. Ghost immediately stepped forward while Snow grabbed Vermithor, channeling as much holy energy as he could in a desperate attempt to heal Frey's legs. Ghost extended his hands, manipulating the void using his full power. Space Cleave. Unleashing the same strange force from before, Ghost tore through space and time, trying to wipe out the oncoming horde. His strike was strong enough to cut down even the most durable of them, but in the face of an army that size, it was barely a scratch. Ghost repeated the technique again and again, but reality hit hard. Even though he succeeded in killing some, the blood gushing from his eyes and nose was a brutal reminder. He wasn't strong enough to wield that power freely. Meanwhile, after tending to Frey's legs, Snow looked up at the rapidly approaching army, his mind racing for a way to survive. Should I use the Void Step? He considered it, but he quickly realized it was a bad idea. He didn't have enough aura left, and as if reading his thoughts, Fry placed a hand on Snow's shoulder, glowing with a deep violet light. In the next moment, an overwhelming surge of aura poured into Snow's body. "Don't hesitate. We have to survive. No matter what it takes." Drawing both Balerion and the Dark Sister, Fry stood tall as Snow nodded in response. They knew now that escape wasn't an option. Those monsters would chase them to the ends of the world if they had to. And so, Fry and Snow charged forward, unleashing their full power in a desperate attempt to survive. Within seconds, the clash began. The champion of the Victoriad and the hero of the Church, the finest of the new human generation, dived into the heart of the monstrous tide, tearing through them like madmen. Fry unleashed wave after wave of dark aura, while Snow unleashed every elemental technique in his arsenal. They shone brightly, but their light dimmed slowly amidst the endless swarm. At some point, coated in blood and filth, they could no longer tell what their blades were cutting. They simply struck at anything that came close. As for Ghost, he fought to support them with everything he had, swinging his sword left and right. Fry turned suddenly, sensing something touch his back. But he stopped just in time before cutting down the figure behind him. It was Snow, now standing back to back with him. They had nearly struck each other down, but froze instead, bloodied and breathless, as they realized the full extent of the disaster. They were completely surrounded, from the east and the west, from the north and the south, from every direction. Nightmare beasts, an unending horde of them. Their eyes met. Fry and Snow exchanged a silent nod. All Fry wanted to say in that moment was one word: sorry. Not sorry for his own fate, but for leading Snow and Ghost into a death trap they never should have walked into. But Snow's eyes understood. He didn't blame him. Men are responsible for their own choices, and Snow had come of his own free will, not anyone else's. If he were to blame anyone, he would blame himself, for his weakness and his powerlessness. If we get another life, let's try to do better. With a bloody smile, Snow spoke what he believed would be his final words, bracing for the end. But the end he was waiting for never came. Instead, something entirely different did. A sharp screech, the sound of metal grinding against metal. It tore through the battlefield like a blade through silence. And once more, time itself seemed to freeze. A savage storm descended, and blood exploded everywhere, raining down like a crimson flood. Clean. So clean. That was all Fry and the others could think when they saw the nightmare creatures sliced to pieces, cut with terrifying precision. Blue slashes of destructive aura, shaped like arcs, swept through the battlefield, turning the horde into shredded meat. The strikes hit only what needed to be struck, never touching Fry and his companions at the center of it all. Blood rained over their heads, soaking them until they looked like corpses themselves. But their eyes, still very much alive, searched for the source of that stunning assault. And soon they found their answer. From within the sea of blood and corpses, with slow, deliberate steps, an old man approached, bent over with age, wearing an old black suit, still immaculately clean, a sharp contrast to the filth around him. He held a katana in one hand and a cane in the other. His wrinkled face rose to meet them. Fry, without even thinking, ran toward him, staggering through the pool of blood. Snow and Ghost were stunned. Another human? But Fry recognized him. His father had once met 4 individuals from the Shadow Sect. A man with a spear, a dark-skinned woman, a strange child who floated in the air, and a hunched old man. The one standing before him now was the 4th. Fry rushed through the bloody lake. But as the danger faded, so did his adrenaline. Pain rushed back in. The searing agony of torn muscles and shattered legs overwhelmed him. He collapsed before the old man's feet, bloodied even more than before. But the old man didn't step back. Instead, he stepped forward. Fry, shaking from everything he had endured, clung to the man's coat, staining it with his blood. Barely able to speak, he looked up at the elder and pleaded, "Please." He clutched him tightly, afraid he might vanish. The old man gently ran his hand over Frey's body, searching for his face. That's when Fry realized. He can't see. The powerful old man was blind. He had lost his sight long ago. Fry asked him, "What do you want from me? Why had the system forced him through this journey? What the hell was I supposed to find in this pit of hell?" He demanded answers, desperate and angry. But the old man only continued to trace Frey's face, before offering a calm, deep smile, a smile of peace, as if a great burden had finally been lifted from his shoulders. He said nothing. Instead, he simply pointed behind him. He had given Fry his answer. "There. If you want your answers, then go there." The old man, who had just displayed power on par with the SSS rank, had completed his mission. Fry still clung to him, trying to extract more answers to the questions tormenting him. Who is the engineer? Who were those for? What happened more than 300 years ago? But the old man said nothing. He simply patted Frey's shoulder, then gently helped him to his feet, as if to say, "Don't fall. Keep going." The old man's smile was the last thing Fry saw before he vanished, like he had never been there at all. But the sea of blood and the carefully dissected remains of the nightmare beasts proved otherwise. Standing in that ocean of carnage, Fry and the others finally understood. They had found their next destination. Chapter 293, Crownlands 1. Slowly, the sky shed its crimson veil and donned the black cloak of night, marking the end of yet another hellish day. Here, in Launder, as darkness settled, the only source of light for the three battered warriors came from the three colossal moons overhead. Exhausted, they dragged their broken bodies away from the lake of blood and corpses. Now a feast for the circling crows. The elegant armor that once covered their bodies had been torn to shreds, along with their flesh, leaving behind deep wounds and grotesque bruises. They were drenched in filth, as if they'd been rolling through mud for hours. In that miserable state, Fry and his companions climbed a hill, slightly higher than the surrounding terrain. The moment they reached the top, they collapsed. No longer able to move, they sat in silence, staring at one another. The only sounds were their heavy breathing and the harsh caws of the crow-like creatures devouring the nightmare beasts below. Looking at each other now, Fry couldn't help but remember their first day in Launder, how they had arrived with excitement, in full strength, clad in vibrant armor. Now they looked worse than beggars. He. Fry was the first to break the silence, laughing under his breath. Eft. Snow followed, sharing the same thoughts. "They really got us, huh? You said it." Both of them burst into tired, bitter laughter, a kind of mournful amusement at their pitiful state. "Where's your usual charm now? That signature white hair and those golden eyes of yours. You look like a street rat. I bet the girls would run away the moment they see you." Fry mocked Snow, whose hair had turned reddish from all the blood that had soaked him. "Oh, look who's talking," Snow smirked. "One glance is enough to see you're the most pitiful one here." He lightly tapped Frey's leg, earning a groan in response. "You can't even walk properly. How do you plan to keep going in that condition?" Laughing despite the pain, Fry bent his legs with effort, looking at Snow. "Even when I can't walk, I'm still faster than you." "Bullshit. Look at yourself, O mighty champion of the Victoriad. If I were you, I'd bury my head in a hole. You're no better, promised hero of the church. That so-called divine light of yours was pretty dim back there." They exchanged jabs, mocking each other, while Ghost sat silently between them, eyes closed, not saying a word. The laughter lingered a while longer, before fading into quiet. Their loud voices slowly diminished as they sat in stillness, eyes fixed on the ground. "We were completely defeated," Snow finally said. "Yes," Fry replied. "We overestimated our strength. Yes, we're just insects crawling in the dirt, beneath monsters that soar across realms and dimensions." Fry stared at the ground for a few seconds before answering. Yes, truth had a bitter taste, a very bitter one. To be weak in a world ruled by power was a curse. Fry and the others now understood just how painful it was to be powerless. So powerless that their lives meant nothing, mere toys in the hands of others. The Lord of Graves had decided their lives would end, and there was nothing they could do to stop him. It was luck and that blind old man who had saved them. And once again, it wasn't their will. It wasn't their choice. Fry slowly raised his head, fully grasping that cruel truth. So what now? What do you do when you finally realize your own insignificance? Do you turn back, tail between your legs, burdened by shame and defeat? Do you accept the dark fate that awaits, and bow before those titans looming above? Fry and Snow looked at each other, then smiled at the same time. A weary smile. No words were needed. Snow rose to his feet, gripping Vermithor, and walked with heavy steps toward the center of their small camp. There, at that precise spot, he drove the blade into the ground. Vermithor immediately released a wave of holy energy, enveloping the three of them in a circular dome that glowed with a soft green light, gently beginning to heal their wounds. Despite their shattered bodies, despite the blood, the pain, and the filth, their eyes still burned sharper than ever. After all, if there was one thing they had grown used to, it was despair, no matter how many times it crushed them, slamming them into the dirt. As long as life still clung to their bodies, they would rise again and again, until the bitter end. The three of them sat there as their bodies slowly healed. None of them slept. Fueled by fury, they turned that seething emotion into the fire that kept their broken bodies moving. None of them looked back. Retreat was never an option. Even if they chose to run, the Lord of Graves still waited beyond the barrier. And even if they somehow made it past him, there was no road leading home. Their path had remained the same from the beginning, the one the strange old man had pointed them toward. Time passed. The sky turned red, then black, then red again, 3 full cycles. None of them knew how time worked on this wretched planet. But they waited, patiently, until the soft green glow emitted by Vermithor faded, its light disappearing when there was nothing left to heal. That pure light had mended torn flesh and broken bone, restoring Fry and the others to a state where they could at least fight again. Once healed, the three of them cleaned themselves up one last time before changing their armor and gear. As he pulled his new armor from the dimensional ring, Fry realized something. Looking inside, he saw food and water, just enough to keep them alive. But what caught his attention was the piece of armor in his hand. It was the last one. How long had it been since they arrived in this land? He'd stopped counting after they passed the 1-month mark, but it was far more than that for sure. In that moment, Fry realized they were approaching their limits. Whatever awaited them at the end of that dark path, they had to reach it, soon. "Let's move," Fry said quietly, before surging forward with the others. Their bodies, now vessels of aura, surged across the land at speeds that left nothing behind but afterimages. Blurs like bullets cutting through the wind. The terrain ahead was wide open, a vast plain with nothing on it. It stretched out before them like a ceremonial carpet, as if welcoming them toward the main event. From the look of the land, and the strange barrier they had passed, Fry guessed this was Crownlands, the one spoken of by those whipped corpses. And despite their incredible speed, the scenery ahead never changed, a testament to how immense this land truly was. They ran, and ran. Chapter 294. Crownlands. 2. Fry kept his hawk eyes active, constantly surveying the distance far ahead. But the view remained the same, until the 3rd day on Crownlands. Frey's subtle unease was enough to alert both Snow and Ghost, who quickly asked, "Something ahead?" Fry responded immediately, "Something's waiting for us, and a lot of it." He could barely see it. A distant mirage. But what he was certain of was this: a massive number of strange beings lay in wait. "Worst-case scenario, it's another army," Fry said, worry evident in his voice. Snow and Ghost tensed, their expressions hardening. Fry didn't say it out loud, but the size of the army he saw was far greater than the one they had faced before. So vast he couldn't see its end. He wondered what kind of battle awaited them now. That question lingered for quite some time as they continued running. And then, after what felt like an eternity, with their nerves frayed and dread mounting under the weight of anticipation, they finally arrived. Fry and the others came to a stop, eyes wide as they took in the sight before them. The army was enormous, so enormous that what they had mistaken for ground in the distance had been them all along. They all wore the same tattered black robes. Their bodies were slightly larger than an average human's. All of them lay sprawled on the ground, prostrated, face down, motionless. Fry approached one of them cautiously, curious why they hadn't reacted to their presence. The moment he touched the figure, crumbled, collapsing into ash. The wind scattered it like dust. Stunned, Fry checked the others, eyes wide, while Snow and Ghost did the same. And that was when the three of them finally understood. The massive army before them was nothing more than a field of skeletons. Corpses so ancient that time had reduced them to nothing but dust. Confused, the three of them looked at each other. "They're all dead," Fry said, and Ghost confirmed. "And they've been dead for a long, long time. Whatever era these skeletal beings had once belonged to, it was long gone. But what caught their attention was the way they died. They died while bowing, from the remnants left behind. The posture of their bodies, the way their heads were lowered. It was clear they had died prostrating before something, before someone or something. They waited until their veins dried, until their bodies withered away. Whatever strange race they once belonged to, they had died here, on their knees, waiting for something to come. It hadn't been demons that killed them. Protected inside this barrier, their killer had been time itself. Realizing this truth sent a chill through Fry and the others. What kind of loyalty is that? Who was this great king that compelled such devotion? Devotion so absolute that an entire people remained kneeling until nothing remained of them but bone? To Fry and his companions, that level of loyalty seemed like pure madness. Fry turned his gaze forward, toward the direction every single corpse had been facing. But all he could see was more bodies, more bowed skeletons, more of the same. "Let's go," he said flatly, beginning to walk through the field of kneeling corpses. They wove their way between the fallen. The scene repeated itself endlessly. All of them had died the same way. Driven by a growing curiosity to uncover what lay at the end of this graveyard path, Fry and the others continued. But the corpses never stopped, and that only deepened their unease. After walking for what felt like an eternity, they realized they had become a speck. A single drop in an ocean of death. Their numbers had reached the millions. "Maybe," Snow said, stunned. "Maybe this is where all of Londer's inhabitants ended up." Fry nodded, remembering what that lashed corpse had told them. It had said clearly, they waited for so long that some eventually chose to fight, while the rest remained behind, still waiting. Those who chose to fight met a fate worse than death, forced to face the Lord of Graves himself. Understanding that grim truth, Fry continued, "But those who chose to wait died here, kneeling, waiting for a king who never returned. Between death and a fate worse than death, the three of them finally grasped the full extent of Londer's tragedy. And with that realization, there was nothing left to do but keep moving. Step after step, they passed through this ancient, forgotten mass of mourners. Then, without warning, a strange shiver ran down Frey's spine. His heart pounded. That same feeling from before returned, but stronger this time. And that was when something else appeared before them. For the first time, something other than corpses. It stood in the distance, but they could see it clearly. A towering structure looming ahead. "A castle?" Fry murmured, staring at the massive building forged from a strange black stone that shimmered like metal. The moon hovered above that monolithic castle, casting pale light across the one place every single corpse had been kneeling toward, like pilgrims who had finally found their sacred destination. From every direction, the bodies surrounded it, making the fortress look like an island in the middle of a vast, lifeless sea. The castle was larger than anything the three of them had ever seen. So massive, it made the Emperor's palace look like a worthless shack by comparison. And the feeling growing inside Frey's chest confirmed that this place, this castle, was their true destination. Step by step, they moved forward, until at last, they reached the edge of the sea of corpses. It was there, at the final line of skeletons, that Fry and the others realized something else. The kneeling dead had left a clear space between themselves and the Black Castle. A wide, circular gap, untouched. No one had dared cross that final threshold. Beyond it stood the castle gate. But that wasn't all. Frey's eyes went wide as he saw what stood before it. Guarding the entrance was a statue, a towering figure, over 4 meters tall, gripping a double-edged scythe. His body was made of a dark, metallic material, like forged shadow. The statue, a statue with a face Fry had never seen before. He had seen smiles. He had seen sorrow. But this one war rage, there it stood. The statue of Fury, an ancient sentinel, standing guard over a timeless castle. Chapter 295. Angry One. An angry mask. Angry. Without realizing it, Fry gave one of his signature nicknames to the strange statue with the furious expression. Standing amid the sea of kneeling corpses, both Snow and Ghost stared at the massive figure that stood between them and the castle beyond. "Do you know what that thing is?" Snow asked, eyes still fixed on Fry. "I know his brothers." Frey's answer was the last thing Snow expected to hear. Brothers. On second thought, he looks more like their father. I don't remember Smiley or Sad being this big. Faced with Frey's cryptic nonsense, impossible to decipher, Snow gave up on extracting any useful information from him. "It looks dead to me." Ghost, ignoring the pair's exchange, offered his own take as he observed the statue. Angry hadn't moved an inch. The hollows in his furious mask revealed nothing but blackness, void of light or life. Whether it's alive or not doesn't matter. We need to enter that castle. What Fry sought was inside. He could feel it now more than ever, the fire in his chest burning brighter, guiding him to this place. "Then let's move." At that moment, the trio took their first step into the empty ring that separated the castle from the ocean of corpses. One step, then another. They moved deeper into the void between the kneeling dead and the silent fortress. That's when the earth began to shake. A massive tremor froze them in place as Fry grinned with wild delight. "I knew it!" As if some hidden mechanism had been triggered. Angry lit up with a violet glow, and his metal body began to tremble violently, unleashing a crushing wave of aura. "Shit!" Snow cursed, drawing Vermithor, as all three prepared for battle. The statue pulled his giant scythe from the earth, twirling it effortlessly before assuming a battle stance. "Wait! I know your brothers." In an absurd gesture, Fry waved at Angry. "We're not enemies." He pleaded with the massive figure before him, using logic that wouldn't convince a sane human, let alone a statue with a face carved in rage. But to everyone's surprise, Angry didn't move. Still, silent. Snow and Ghost stared in disbelief. Did that actually work? Was it even possible to reason with that thing? Their confusion was written all over their faces. Fry half smiled, surprised at his own unexpected success. But that smile vanished the moment his hawk eyes reflected the gleam of the statue's massive scythe. He barely reacted in time. In a blink, Angry had vanished and reappeared right in front of him. When did he get there? Fry barely blocked the swing with his swords, and was sent flying, crashing through the earth, leaving a trail of destruction behind him. So be it. No choice but to fight. Snow launched himself at Angry, unleashing a blazing star-infused aura as he swung his blade with all his might. The clash of metal echoed for miles as Angry parried the blow effortlessly, dispersing all the explosive aura in an instant. From beneath the statue's feet, ghost shadows emerged, attempting to bind it. But with a single violent stomp, Angry shattered the ground, and ghost shadows along with it. Then, wielding his scythe at blinding speed, the furious statue unleashed a barrage of devastating strikes on Snow, who struggled to defend as the earth crumbled beneath him. Ghost, now in his Reaper form, joined the fray, wielding a scythe of dark, potent aura. But the moment his weapon clashed with Angry's, it shattered. Too strong, completely outmatched, Ghost adjusted his stance. In that case, how about this? With his fingers moving like blades, Ghost sliced through space itself, launching his strongest spatial cut. The ground split violently as the strike slammed into the statue's body. A move that had once cleaved through nightmare creatures with ease didn't even leave a scratch. All it did was force Angry to take a single, reluctant step backward. No way. At that moment, Ghost finally began to understand just how much he had underestimated the power of the statue. 10,000 steps of shadow, black meteor. From behind Ghost, a dark beam erupted, crashing violently into Angry and unleashing a surge of destructive aura that shattered the ground beneath them. You damn statues all prefer to do it this way. Fry had returned to the battle. Boom! You want a fight? Then you'll get one. To Fry, every memory of statues was a blur of endless beatings, brutal training sessions where they had taught him how to fight day and night. And from the look of it, Angry was no different, except for one critical detail. As the clash went on and their strikes continued, Fry started to notice the deep, vicious wounds spreading across his body. Angry wasn't playing. He was truly trying to kill him. Wielding that massive scythe like it was weightless, Angry completely overpowered him. Snow joined as well, attacking from behind. Yet the statue remained calm, effortlessly spinning its scythe to parry every attack, as if toying with them. A wave of violet aura blasted out, sending them flying, slamming face first into the earth. Still, Angry didn't stop. He kept advancing, relentlessly tearing them apart as their blood spilled across the dirt. This is insane. Fry cursed under his breath, finally grasping the gravity of the situation. Angry was far stronger than both Smiley and Sad. He wasn't even fighting seriously. And yet Fry could tell his power was at least on par with Mikar. Slash! A sudden blow snapped Fry out of his daze. Blood spraying from his body. Fry! Snow shouted in horror as he saw Frey's right hand fly through the air, severed cleanly by Angry's scythe. His hand hit the ground, along with the Dark Sister, just as Angry raised his weapon again, this time aiming for Frey's neck. Void step. Snow appeared between them at the last second, his body flaring with blinding light as he shoved Angry back.
Cosmique formation.
Unleashing his most powerful attack, Snow's explosive aura clashed with Angry's scythe in a cataclysmic burst. The collision sent shockwaves tearing through the air. Snow's nuclear strike hit Angry head-on, blasting the statue backward, carving deep trenches through the ground as he skidded across it, struggling to stay upright. Snow's strongest move had finally pushed the statue back a few meters. But that was all it did. There wasn't even a scratch on its armored body. Realizing the overwhelming power gap, Snow conjured a massive wall of ice between them and the statue, then fled, rushing back to Fry and Ghost, who had already begun retreating. Fry, barely able to think clearly, clutched his severed arm, still in shock from how close he had come to death. All three of them knew now, death was the only thing waiting for them in this fight, and so they ran. But Angry chased after them at terrifying speed. They leapt, dodged, and rolled between the kneeling corpses, now turning to dust underfoot, desperate to escape the statue's reaping scythe. He was faster, far faster. They were certain he'd strike them down at any moment. But then he didn't. Collapsed between the skeletons, the three of them stared in disbelief as Angry froze in place, his scythe just centimeters from Frey's face. The statue stared at them, glowing with violet light from the slits of its mask, then slowly lowered his weapon, and began walking back step by step toward his original position, back to where it had all started. What just happened? Fry asked, breathless, struggling to understand why the statue had suddenly retreated. Snow and Ghost were just as baffled. With his golden eyes, Snow was the first to notice something strange. He looked down at the ground beneath their feet. "We're outside the circle," he said quietly, but the others heard him clearly. "You're right." They had run without thinking, and unknowingly stepped outside the circle. And the moment they did, he stopped. Fry finally understood the mechanism behind the statue. He would never attack unless someone stepped onto the forbidden ground. In other words, that circular space surrounding the castle. Chapter 296. Angry, 2. Fry understood it, but a searing wave of pain tore through him, yanking him out of his thoughts and back to the empty space where his right arm used to be. Groaning in agony as blood poured from the wound, Fry channeled all his focus into his limb, trying to reattach it. Snow rushed toward him immediately, using Vermithor to assist in the healing. Ghost, with a swift movement of his hand, began stitching the arm with incredible speed, trying to reconnect it before it was too late. When they finished, Ghost stepped back. "Even with all that, there's no guarantee you'll be able to use it again," he said with concern. Fry just smiled. "No need to worry. My body's a little different from the average human." He had never feared losing an arm. It wasn't the first time he'd lost one anyway, and he could already start to feel his fingers again. Ironically, the last time he lost an arm had also involved statues. A strange coincidence. The Shadow Sect, and now this black castle. Fry wondered what exactly it was these statues were guarding this time. It was an answer he wouldn't get, not unless he could get past his angry friend. He's way too strong. Yeah, and he hasn't even shown everything he's capable of yet. Fry stood just outside the edge of the circle. But he won't attack us, unless we step inside it. It wasn't an absolute rule, but their recent survival was enough of a clue. Even if he doesn't attack us outside, that doesn't help if we want to enter the castle. The only way forward was through the furious statue that now blocked their path entirely. Ghost, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke, having reached a conclusion. "Our goal is to get inside the castle, not to defeat him." There was no need to kill the statue. They just needed to get past it. "You're right," Snow said, stepping forward with a confident smile. "Frey's faster than me when it comes to combat, but overall I've got the edge." With his signature ability, Void Step, Snow was confident he could at least reach the gate. "Wait," Fry interrupted, raising his hand. "We don't know if he'll stop chasing you even after you enter the castle. There was always a chance he'd follow them inside." "You're not wrong, but standing here doing nothing won't change a thing." "In that case," Fry raised the arm he had just lost moments ago. Normally, there was no way it should be usable again so soon. But his body was far from normal. The holy energy of Snow's sword had already brought him close to a near-perfect recovery. "Go. We'll support you from behind." Snow nodded and stepped forward, Fry and Ghost flanking him. He took a deep breath. His golden eyes lit up. Void Step. Time halted. Everything froze in place. Except Snow. Bathed in pure blue light, he surged forward, his body like a beam of energy racing across the ground. He passed the statue. He passed his companions, and made it all the way to the castle gate. For a brief moment, he exhaled in relief. But then his golden eyes widened. Someone else was moving. Someone who had ignored the frozen world completely, and was now right behind him. Bathed in glowing violet aura, Angry was in pursuit, and he was faster. Snow realized, too late, how naive he had been. The statue possessed a technique stronger than Void Step. Their weapons clashed mid-sprint. Snow tried to push back, but Angry's scythe buried him into the ground. 10,000 steps of shadow, eternal darkness. Fry intervened at the last second, releasing a wave of pure shadow that swallowed Angry whole. Using that veil of darkness, He and Snow retreated once more to the safe zone. Angry emerged from the cloud, returning silently to his place. His glowing violet eyes locked onto the three of them. Snow, panting hard, let out a laugh at his miserable state. The gate is right in front of us, and we still can't reach it. After everything they'd endured, they stood right at the finish line, yet it remained just out of reach. What now? Do we keep playing with this thing until it kills us? It was clear. They couldn't defeat it. We have to find a way, Fry muttered, racking his brain, remembering everything he had learned under Smiley and Sad. He had never beaten them, and now he was up against an even more advanced version. But this time he had to get through. With that determination burning in them, the three of them charged toward Angry again. And once more, a devastating battle broke out. Each exchange released shockwaves of aura that tore through the land. The ground shattered beneath them, and blood splattered as they fought. The first clash failed, forcing them to retreat with serious wounds. Then, after recovering, they tried again, and again. Boom! The ground shook harder than ever before. More violently, more blood-soaked, the three fought with everything they had, trying to breach the towering black castle. But the statue was too fast, too powerful. Every attempt was shut down, crushed, until they were left with no choice but to retreat to the safe zone. It was either that or death. That same scene, Angry mercilessly overwhelming them, played out over and over. So many times, in fact, that they had lost count. They were in shambles. And one thing became clear. The statue wouldn't budge. Despair began to creep in. Angry was simply impenetrable. Without weakness, breaking through him felt utterly impossible. Caked in dust, blood, and exhaustion, Snow looked down at his battered comrades, then up at the motionless statue. He stared for a long moment before raising his fist to his face, thinking deeply about his next move. He released his aura. From a distance it might have looked bright, brilliant even, but in front of someone like Angry, it was faint, flickering. In their current state, giving 100% wasn't enough. They needed more. Much more. Snow understood that completely, and so, he made his decision. Fry, when I give the signal, run toward the castle with everything you've got. His tone was serious. Fry narrowed his eyes. What are you planning? With a crooked smile, Snow answered, I'll hold him off while you make it inside. It sounded insane. They had already tried that again and again, and every time they failed. But this time, it was different. Snow took a shaky breath as a golden aura enveloped his body. Symbols began forming, etched into his skin like ink made of molten gold. His face, his arms, his legs, covered in divine marks. The pressure coming off him was staggering. Both Fry and Ghost could only watch in awe. That's the War King's form, Snow answered with effort, barely able to contain what was building inside him. Ghost, I need you to support me from the shadows. But whatever happens, don't reveal yourself. What are you talking about? Ghost asked. But Snow kept going, time was short. Hurry! This form always comes with one thing. An uncontrollable thirst for blood. A thirst he would direct solely at the statue. Once the War King's form was activated, there was no stopping until the enemy was dead. I'll throw everything I have at him. So use that chance, Fry, and get inside, he shouted as his aura surged with every word. He didn't know how far this power would take him. But he was betting it would be enough. Enough to create an opening, even if he had to face it alone. Someone had to make it through. Understood, Fry replied, nodding. He finally understood why Snow hadn't fought with everything he had in the Victoriad Finals. Because he couldn't control this terrifying power that enhanced him to unnatural levels. Enduring the pressure that felt like it would split his skull. Snow slammed his foot against the ground, and in the blink of an eye, appeared before Angry. His speed caught the statue off guard for just a fraction of a second. A fraction was all he needed. Snow unleashed a devastating star charge strike. A massive slash tore through the earth, launching Angry backward, his scythe dragging along the ground as he struggled to regain balance. But Snow gave him no time to breathe. Taking full advantage of his enhanced speed and strength, he closed in for close combat, pressuring the statue with a relentless flurry of attacks. Ghost, from the shadows, sealed the area in a dome of darkness, concealing both combatants from view as they tore into each other. And in that moment, with everything he had, Fry Starlight charged toward the castle, leaving a blur of afterimages in his wake. Angry noticed the movement and immediately tried to intercept him. But Snow, unleashing an even stronger attack, kept him pinned down. Cosmic Formation, Snow's ultimate technique, now empowered by the War King's form, was like a miniature sun erupting at point-blank range. It detonated directly in Angry's face, and Fry Starlight, leaving that nuclear explosion behind him, took his first step into the heart of that dark castle. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Not if he wanted his friend's sacrifice to mean something. With that thought, Fry walked forward, into the place where everything would end. Chapter 297, Echoes of a Forgotten Self. Snow Lionheart's POV. It had been a long time since I last felt like this. Those golden symbols, whose meaning I never truly understood, had grown stronger ever since I obtained Vermithor, as if it had been the key that unlocked a new realm of power. Everything was connected. The War King's form burned through my aura at a terrifying pace, allowing me to wield levels of power I was never meant to reach. And that was what let me face the furious statue head-on. Locked in a vicious clash with that entity, the two of us spun in a whirlwind of metal, sparks flying with every violent collision. The explosive auras from our battle drowned out all my senses. But I was certain of one thing. Fry had made it through. There was no longer any need to hold back. With a bloody grin, I poured more and more star aura into my sword, each strike landing with greater weight, hammering against that giant scythe. Barely able to hold myself back now, I was fighting to keep the bloodlust in check. I had to finish this quickly. Clutching Vermithor in one hand, I raised the other to summon a storm of elemental force, a barrage of razor-sharp ice spears. Without hesitation, I hurled them at the furious statue's head. But he twirled his scythe like a massive fan, shredding the spears into dust. I didn't give him time to breathe. Using a surge of black lightning, I unleashed a horizontal cut, aimed directly at his torso. Preoccupied with blocking the hail of ice, he reacted too late to stop my lightning strike. Empowered by Void Step, the blow landed clean, forcing him back as the lightning detonated across the ground beneath him. But even then, on his iron body, it left barely a scratch. Tsage. I held back a curse, wondering what on earth this thing was made of. Despite everything, he didn't falter. He simply stared back at me with his glowing violet eyes, as if he was trying to figure out what I was made of. Time was slipping away. In that case, how about this? Swoosh! I unleashed a blinding wave of light from Vermithor, an eruption so intense it blanketed the battlefield, even obscuring the entire black castle behind it. Void Step, using the boosted form of the technique, enhanced by the War King's mode, I coated my blade in a blazing stream of blue fire and hurled it forward like a devastating energy beam. At the same time, I activated Void Step again, this time channeling black lightning. The crackling surge tore through the earth, striking from behind the statue. Void Step. Everything happened in an instant. This time, I pushed my ice aura to its limits, igniting a white frost along my sword's edge, unleashing a wave of sub-zero energy across his exposed flank. Alongside it came a high-frequency sonic blast, shadow aura chains to bind him, and even gravity itself to pull him to the ground. To destroy that statue, I brought out everything I had, surrounded by a storm of overwhelming elemental forces. Angry widened his glowing eyes as the light finally cleared, only to see nature's wrath crashing down on him from every side. The explosion tore through the battlefield, an elemental catastrophe that shattered the terrain and sent shockwaves through the sky. But of course, he survived. Bathed in violet light, a shimmering aura clung to his body like armor, shielding him from the full brunt of my attacks. But this was the moment. The exact moment I'd been waiting for, as the smoke and chaos cleared, and the statue dared to believe the attack was over. He saw me standing directly in front of him, just centimeters away, my stance wide open, my sword aimed straight at his chest. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment the enemy lets down their guard, when the real attack begins. Using the War King's form and Vermithor, I pushed my aura to its absolute limit. Elemental particles danced wildly around my blade, drawing in a breath of fire. The golden markings on my skin blazed to life as I swung with everything I had. Cosmic formation! This time it was 10 times stronger. No, even more than that. A colossal explosion of light swallowed the statue and the entire castle behind him. A pillar of pure white aura surged into the heavens, piercing the clouds, a nuclear beam unleashed at point-blank range. And in the midst of that radiant inferno, the furious statue was finally obliterated, reduced to nothingness by the full force of my power. In that moment, I wished with all my heart that this would be enough to end it all. Fry Starlight's POV. I had finally entered the castle. The Black Castle, the one that made my entire body tremble without end. I glanced at my hand, trying to steady myself, but the way my fingers shook made it clear how utterly I failed at that. Step after step, I wandered through the towering fortress. What I stood upon was the grand entrance to this terrifying place. A hall with walls adorned in symbols and carvings I couldn't understand, and ceilings so high that even the largest giants could walk or run through with ease. But what truly caught my attention, aside from the incomprehensible symbols, were the murals that accompanied them. Illustrations that depicted, as far as I could guess, the life of the one who had once ruled this castle. The scenes on the walls showed glimpses of brutal wars, battles that raged across land and sky on a scale I had never seen before, a scale that managed to send a chill down my spine through images alone, without me needing to live them myself. The enemy in these wars was familiar, always the same, demons. But the mystery lay in who fought the demons. Unlike the demons, who all belonged to one race and were easy to recognize, the other side was chaos incarnate, a gathering of countless different beings and creatures I had never seen or heard of. I couldn't help but wonder if what I was seeing was real, or just some imagined depiction crafted to embellish this place. Completely captivated by the murals, my senses returned when the ground suddenly shook beneath me. A violent tremor rocked the castle as the thunderous roar of an explosion echoed through the walls. That aura! Stunned, I recognized it instantly. It was familiar, yet far stronger than I had ever felt it before. The source of that attack could only be one person. Snow still battling angry outside. That blast reminded me, again, that I had to keep moving, that I needed to end this once and for all. It was the least I could do for my comrades, who were fighting in my place beyond those walls, to bring an end to all this madness, to find the answers I'd been searching for, answers to questions that had long haunted my life. With those thoughts burning in my mind, I charged deeper into the castle, hungry for the truth, and the further I went, the more I realized how vast this place truly was. A massive citadel, built like an ancient museum, but completely empty. Other than the decorated walls carrying those paintings, there was nothing, nothing at all. Like a ghost house of ancient wars, left alone in the middle of a sea of kneeling pilgrims, worshippers of a king who never returned. The more I advanced, the higher I climbed the grand staircase, the slower my steps became. That fire inside my chest grew hotter and hotter, until it felt like my insides were burning. My pulse pounded. A splitting headache roared in my skull. I started breathing heavily, clutching the wall just to keep moving. What is happening to me? My vision blurred. I could barely keep my consciousness from slipping. The long corridor ahead of me began to twist and ripple, like an old painting fading with time. Then the pain struck, blinding, searing. Even I, someone well acquainted with agony, screamed from the depths of my soul. I writhed on the ground, unable to see, as visions flooded my mind. As if the murals had come to life inside my head. People I had never met, places I had never seen, all accompanied by torment I couldn't fight. All I could do was scream and pray for it to end. But it didn't. It never stopped. It was like someone was crushing my skull with a giant hammer, again and again and again. For the first time in my life, I cursed the strength of my mental resilience. That ability, which once felt like a blessing, now felt like a curse that kept me conscious through every moment of that pain. I twisted on the ground for hours, like an insect, until finally, my eyes rolled back into empty white, and I lost consciousness at last. But even in that unconscious state, the visions didn't stop. They followed me into my dreams, haunted me through that endless train of torment. And after what felt like an eternity, I finally opened my eyes. Chapter 298. The one battle you can't win. After that relentless spiral of pain, I stared forward for a few seconds, my thoughts still scattered, until my senses slowly returned. And that's when I realized I was no longer inside the Black Castle. Where am I? That was the first question I asked myself. But the answers, they were starting to take shape on their own. I was sitting on a wooden chair, inside an ordinary room with a single bed, a desk, and a few simple pieces of furniture. Things that made it obvious the space belonged to a guy in his 20s. Right in front of me, another person sat, also in his 20s, with a look so familiar I recognized him instantly. We were face to face. I started laughing quietly at first, a hollow laugh, wondering if I'd finally lost my mind. After all, this room was mine. These were my things. And the person sitting across from me was me. Or rather, the version of me I used to look like long ago, before the reincarnation, before everything began. My past self smiled as I laughed like a madman. "Welcome back," he said, using my old voice, and something about it felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. "Welcome back where?" I asked, still smiling uncontrollably. "Home," he answered calmly. The moment I heard that word, I sighed, exhausted, tired of all this illusion. "Home? Did you people go and recreate my old house? Turned it into one of your little trials? I wouldn't even be surprised if the walls suddenly exploded and monsters came crawling in to devour my brain." My past self chuckled at my reaction. "So cynical. Life really hasn't been kind to you, has it?" His words were simple, but they hit harder than I expected, especially coming from an old version of myself. A version that once lived a peaceful life, far removed from the endless spiral of blood and death I've endured since then. If I were still the same person from back then, I probably wouldn't be thinking this way at all. That realization left a bitter taste in my mouth. It made me angry, without even knowing why. "Who are you? What illusion have you trapped me in this time?" To be honest, I'd already tried to strike him multiple times. But neither Balerion nor the Dark Sister answered me. No matter how hard I called for them. Powerless, I was left with no choice but to play along with this absurd play. The smile on my former self's face slowly widened, as if he could hear every thought racing through my head. He looked around and said, "This isn't an illusion. It's what you call home, but not your real home." Annoyed, I cut him off. "What are you even talking about? This place is the safe haven your mind created. The place you feel most at ease. And me? I'm the version of yourself you long for more than anything." Silence settled for a few seconds as I tried to process his words. "So in other words, all of this is happening inside my head?" He nodded. "That's right." Once I got my answer, I leaned back into the wooden chair. I really have lost my mind this time, huh? With a smile, my past self agreed. You lost it a long time ago. Sitting here, talking to myself inside my own head without restraint, I couldn't help but wonder. When did everything start to slip from my hand? When did I change this much? You haven't necessarily changed, my other self said. And yet you have. He pointed at himself. My existence is proof of that. What do you mean? I asked. Like I said, I'm the ideal version of you, the one you wish you could be again. And this place is the sanctuary your mind has built around that wish. This is where your family lives. And what's wrong with that? I asked. These choices of yours mean you're still trapped in the past. You still see me as the better version of yourself. Not the person you are now, Fry. And this place, he said, casting a thoughtful glance around him before continuing. This is still the place you call home, but not the Starlight Estate, where your reincarnated father lives, and your sister resides now. He looked genuinely sorrowful as he said those words. In other words, you're still stuck in the past, Fry. You've changed. And at the same time, you haven't. Between past and present, a lot had changed. That much was inevitable, given the life I had lived since my reincarnation. And yet, deep inside, parts of me remained exactly the same. Deep down inside, I was still yearning for the life I had lost, a life I knew I could never return to. Just thinking about it stirred feelings I didn't want to face. So I shut his words down with cold detachment. Hey! With the same cold gaze I'd always given my enemies, I looked straight at him. Isn't it time you told me why I'm here? The moment I asked, my other self looked surprised. Then smiled again, faintly with sorrow in his eyes. So, time's up, huh? Time for what? You're about to get answers to some of the questions that have haunted you. As soon as he said that, I felt my curiosity stir, despite myself. But you're not ready to hear them yet, which means you'll have to face what's waiting behind that door. Door? I asked, confused, only to realize that a strange door had appeared behind him. His expression grew more sorrowful as he glanced at it. With a half-smile, I looked at him. So there's another test, huh? Nothing new. I've never gained anything without a struggle. But my other self only looked more pained. This time, it's different. He stammered slightly, his eyes locked on mine. You won't be able to overcome what's behind that door. Lowering his head, his shoulders trembled. That's why I brought you here. Please, Fry, don't open that door. With every word he spoke, the cracks in the closed door behind him began to glow brighter. There has to be another way. You don't have to do this. Please don't go. Lowering his head toward me, I stared at the man who was supposed to be me, and though he tried to stop me, he truly was worried for me. I could feel it, because he was me. But he lifted his head when I placed my hand gently on his right shoulder, offering him a faint, bittersweet smile. I'm sorry. I didn't need to say more. If he truly was me, he already knew the answer. With sorrow, he nodded. There's no other way, is there? There were no shortcuts, no easy paths. If I wanted to reach the end, I had to face whatever waited for me, no matter what it was. And so, with resolve, I stepped forward and opened the door. A brilliant light erupted, swallowing me whole. My other self remained where he was, watching with a pained smile. You won't win this time, Fry. The light faded slowly, allowing me to see what was on the other side. This time, your opponent can't be defeated. The place I now stood in was hauntingly familiar, but it wasn't the room itself that made me tremble. It was the people inside. You won't win, not against them. Darkness swallowed the previous room, my old self vanishing along with it, and the space I had just entered lit up fully. There, inside that room, stood 4 figures. Welcome back. They spoke in unison, and I stood frozen, completely stunned. What? In the blink of an eye, my mind went blank. Everything faded. Everything I had been until now was erased, memories slipping away like water through fingers. Before the people I had chased for so long, like chasing a mirage, my family, they were all here, with a mind too empty to even process it properly. I smiled, a smile I hadn't worn in a very, very long time. I'm home. Home at last. Chapter 299. Welcome back, Fry Starlight. Fry Starlight's POV. Home. I was sitting at a table with the people I had longed to see more than anything else. Each of them welcomed me with a warm smile. A smile I had nearly forgotten after all this time. I'm home. My mind went completely blank, consumed by the moment I had wished for so desperately. It's been hard, hasn't it? My mother said, placing a hand gently on my back as she sat beside me, trying to comfort me. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. I didn't even know what to say. I simply nodded, lowering my head. I'd held back those buried emotions until the very end, the ones clawing their way to the surface, threatening to explode at any second. It was hard, so incredibly hard. I looked down at myself, afraid of how much I had changed, but there was no need for that fear. My family accepted me instantly, just as they always had. That warmth I had missed for so long. I suffered so much. I fought and lost, then stood up again, and again. With a shuddered breath, I couldn't hold the tears back any longer. I clenched my teeth hard, digging my fingers into my palms so deeply they drew blood. But no matter what I did, I couldn't stop the tears. As if on instinct, they all gathered around to comfort me. My father placed a hand on my shoulder. My younger brother hugged me tightly. Even my middle brother, whom I'd never been especially close with, stood beside our father. It's okay, son. You're safe now. Those words, they were like a drug. They made me feel drunk with relief. When I finally calmed down, I found my little brother still clinging to me, just like he used to in the past. Tell me about your adventures, big brother. I blinked in surprise. He wanted me to talk about everything I'd been through? Stop. Do you want him to relive all those horrible things? As expected, my mother stepped in immediately, still thinking of my comfort before anything else, scolding the youngest as he shrank back in guilt. That's when I decided to step in. With a gentle smile, I reassured her. It's okay. I've always wanted someone I could tell my story to. And in that moment, who better than my family? Sitting beside my little brother and surrounded by the ones I loved most, I began to tell them my story. It all started when I opened my eyes in a wide room that looked like it belonged to the Middle Ages. From the beginning, I told them everything. A long tale that spanned hours. But I didn't leave out a single detail. How I woke up in the body of Fry Starlight. The Starlight family. The journey into the Eastern Nightmare Lands. My suffering inside the Shadow Sect. How Fry Starlight was rebuilt from zero. Every event brought a different reaction from my family. They listened to every word. My entry into the temple. My battle against the Moonlight family. All the way to the fated Victoriad. The fight with the princess. Then the journey to another planet as the final act. A story of bitter struggle. Of blood spilled. A body that withstood countless horrors just to make it here. Took me several hours to tell it all. By the end, I had lost my voice. But they listened until the very last word. And I was deeply grateful for that. That was amazing! My younger brother exclaimed, wide-eyed with excitement. He was completely captivated by the tale I had told. Both of my parents nodded at the same time, clearly in agreement. Your brother's right, my father said. Even we, as adults who don't understand much about these kinds of novels, we still found it fascinating. Stories like that could grab the attention of a massive audience. Why not publish it? I'm sure it would be a huge success. Even my middle brother chimed in, encouraging me to turn my life into a novel, saying it could bring me fame and maybe even fortune. I agreed with every word they said. But something stirred my curiosity. A novel? I asked, confused. staring at their smiling faces. At the same time, a strange buzzing sound had been ringing in my ears for a while now. "Yeah, your novel really is amazing." They all said it at once. I stayed silent for a moment, listening to the buzzing sound that had gradually grown louder in my ear. A novel? The story of Fry Starlight. The story of my struggle. Or rather, his struggle. I tried to gather my thoughts, but they slowly slipped away. All logic I had relied on until now was unraveling, as if it had never existed in the first place. So I simply nodded with a faint smile. Yes, it really is a great story. Maybe I should publish it on web novel or something. Who knows? Maybe I could even earn a little money from it. The idea excited me. But how did you come up with something so wild, son? My mother's question gave me pause, since she asked, how did I come up with all of this? With an awkward smile, I answered, you know me, I've always had a vivid imagination. It all just came together in my mind. From nothing, I had built an entire world, a vast and intricate story from scratch. Well, it's great to follow your passion, she said, but don't neglect your work. Writing is fine as a hobby. Just remember that. Of course, you don't need to worry, I reassured her, standing from the dinner table and heading back to my room. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Truly, deeply rested. But for some reason, the buzzing in my ear never stopped. I tried smacking the side of my head a few times, but it was no use. Maybe I should see a doctor? I made a mental note to check on it later, then headed downstairs. It was already 7 a.m. Time to get to work. The company I'd been with for over a year wasn't far from home, but my father still drove me every morning. It had become a tradition, one he always followed for his children. I was the last to get dropped off after my brothers had been taken to school. See you later, my dad said with a smile. I waved back. Yeah, see you. I started walking toward the office building, but paused when I heard him call out to me. Fry! I turned, startled. Did my father just call me by the name of my novel's protagonist? Did you call me? I shouted back, confused, but he just shook his head and waved again before driving off. I scratched my head, wondering if something was wrong with my hearing, then entered the building where I worked. Most of my day was spent inside my office. Not too big, not too small. Comfortable enough. The job wasn't hard, but for some reason, I found myself completely unable to focus. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about the story. The events ran through my mind in vivid, overwhelming detail. Not like a fantasy, but like a reality I had lived. I truly began to wonder. How did I even come up with something like this? Lost in thought, I opened my laptop and found my fingers flying across the keyboard. I began writing the story that had filled my mind from beginning to end. I wasn't exactly a master of language or grammar, but I managed to express every chapter clearly. Each one delivered with growing satisfaction. Little by little. Days passed. Happy days. Days spent wrapped in the warmth of my family. A feeling I hadn't realized how much I'd missed. At the same time, my novel began gaining traction online, building a name for itself around the world. A fantasy so vivid, it makes you feel like you're the main character. That was one of the most common comments I received. And one I couldn't agree with more, because to me, I've always felt like I truly was Fry Starlight. Chapter 300, once more, into the nightmare. Good things kept happening. For months, the buzz in my ear eventually faded completely, and I lived a peaceful, fulfilling life, surrounded by a loving family, and a novel that had turned me into a globally recognized author. That success felt like a gift I made the most of, and for once, I was truly, deeply content with both myself and the life I had been given. The smile never left my face. Not even when I walked the streets at night. I was truly grateful for the life I had been given. That was what I was thinking as I made my way home late at night, After spending time with friends I'd known for what felt like forever. Quietly. So as not to wake my parents, who usually slept early, I opened the front door and slipped inside. I expected to find my younger brother awake, as he often stayed up late playing games. But tonight, he wasn't in his usual spot. Did he go to bed early? I wondered, climbing the stairs to check. But I stopped abruptly when my foot stepped in something wet. Did someone spill something? The house was dark. So I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. And what I saw froze my blood. I dropped to the floor, panicked, my hand reaching into the dark substance I feared was exactly what I thought it was. I wasn't wrong. Blood. A lot of it. At that very moment. The buzzing in my ear returned, louder than ever before. Terrified, I ran forward, each step squelching in more of the blood that soaked the floor beneath me. I didn't want to know the truth. I was afraid to find out. Whose blood was it? Panicking, I flung open the door to my parents' room, and time itself seemed to stop. My world collapsed in an instant. Blood. Everywhere. The room looked like a scene torn straight from a horror movie. Their bodies, my parents, were lying headless on the floor, and their heads were neatly placed at the doorway, staring at me with empty, lifeless eyes. For a moment, couldn't breathe. I staggered back, gasping for air, nausea rising until I threw up everything inside me. My body shook violently. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. Tears spilled out on their own, but the nausea was stronger. Still trembling, I stumbled away from the room, unsure of what to do, unthinking, unfeeling, overwhelmed by grief. But beneath that grief was something even more powerful. Dread. Desperation drove me to my younger brother's room, to cling to any shred of hope still left in this house of death. Felt like a dream. No, a nightmare that had turned my world upside down. Please let them be okay. With a heart ready to burst, I opened the door to my brother's room, and I found him, alongside my other brother. But this time, the scene was even worse. Far worse. Their bodies were unrecognizable. What remained of them didn't even resemble human forms. And then, past the carnage, I saw it. Him. A towering figure over 2 meters tall, shrouded in a black aura that flowed like dark fire. His face was blurred for some reason, obscured beneath long, waterfall-like black hair. But the most vivid, unmistakable part of him were those crimson eyes. I stared at the being who had turned my home into this nightmare, and he turned slowly to face me. Just one look from him made me feel like I had already died 100 times. I couldn't even think of revenge. I couldn't muster anger toward the one who had slaughtered my entire family. All I could do was freeze in place, shaking, powerless, too terrified to take a single step toward the killer of my blood. "It's a painful thing, truly," he said in a deep, echoing voice. And I, still trembling, asked the only question I could manage. "What are you?" There were so many questions I could have asked. Why did he do this? Was this all even real? But the most urgent question in my heart was, what is this thing standing before me? This being couldn't be human, couldn't be real. It was something else. Something that made even the idea of this being a nightmare feel far more believable. When was the last time I felt this helpless? When was the last time I couldn't cry, couldn't scream? When I choked on grief so thick it stopped me from breathing. The creature with the red eyes said nothing else. He simply extended his hand toward me, and with a voice that felt both distant and familiar, he whispered, "Once more." The performance failed this time. As his words echoed, I was forcibly ejected from my own body, as if something was pulling time itself backward. "You're not good enough, Fry Starlight." The moment he uttered that name, its echo reverberated endlessly in my mind. Fry Starlight, Fry Starlight. Clenching my teeth, I fought the urge to scream. as I tumbled through the current of time, cursing everything. How could I forget? How did I dare to forget? I am Fry Starlight. That wasn't a novel. It never was. It was a life I had lived. Every moment, every breath. Send me back. I screamed with everything I had, furious at whoever dared to desecrate the memory of my family like this. Furious at myself for believing that illusion was ever real. What's happening to me? I tried to call out to my swords, tried to unleash everything and tear the illusion apart, but nothing answered. Time rebuilt itself, and the image returned. A familiar table, a familiar room. My family sat around it once more, smiling at me, offering that warmth I had missed so much. Welcome back. They said it again in perfect unison. And I smiled weakly. I wondered, what was I blaming myself for just a moment ago? It felt like something important had been ripped away from me. But that didn't matter, because something more important had returned, standing before the family I loved. I smiled genuinely this time. I'm home. Home at last.